If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Late night workers and security guards who work in haunted places. Have you ever encountered ghostly figures, paranormal apparitions, or shadow beings during your shift? What did you witness?
My workplace is haunted. I'm a 16-year-old teenager living in Ireland and currently working in the countryside for a forestry company in a small town. Right next to the company is a big graveyard that must have been over 300, maybe 400, years old. My job revolves around packing bags of wood and chopping wood into smaller pieces, and sometimes I go planting seeds. Around a week ago, I experienced strange, unexplainable noises and apparitions during my work, including two that I see most often. One time as I was reaching down to grab a bag on the ground, a very distinct black shoe was behind me, but when I turned around, it disappeared. Another experience I had was as I was cutting wood, I saw a tall figure from the corner of my eye slowly get off the ground as if to greet me. However, once I tried to get a better look at him, he just vanished. Other experiences are simple stuff, such as shadows blitzing through the hallways, but the lighting here is bad, so it could have been anything. Thanks for listening to my story. I have two stories from friends of mine who worked in retail. Story 1, the convenience store. One friend worked at a convenience store where the stockroom and personnel break room were said to be haunted. Years earlier, an employee had died there in his sleep and never woke up. According to my friend, the man's spirit lingered, often appearing faceless but still in uniform. Near the stockroom, there was even a small altar with flowers, candles, and saint images, set up by the manager to appease the spirit and pray for him to move on. But despite that, the ghost would still appear, sometimes startling employees who entered alone. My friend only lasted a few weeks at the job because he kept encountering the spirit and couldn't take the constant fear. Story 2, the bookstore. Another friend worked at a well-known premium bookstore in the city, which had 5 floors, including a basement. The staff there had many stories about different hauntings. On the first floor, by the back entrance, some night guards claimed to witness a kind of residual haunting, the ending of a former warehouse employee during a fight years ago. They didn't see the actual ghost, but the scene would replay itself at times. On the second floor, in the kids and teens section, multiple spirits were said to wander: a little girl in a white dress, a young boy, and an old man. The young boy and the old man are always seen wearing rural/farmer clothes and would be spotted walking together, sometimes in between the shelves or on the main path. On the fourth floor, employees spoke of a shapeshifter spirit that mimicked staff members. Because of this, during closing time, employees would quickly shut off lights and rush down to the first floor. Nobody wanted to linger up there in the dark. The third floor, I believe, is the safest since there were no cases or any accounts of ghostly encounters. Story courtesy of my friend, who worked at a juvenile detention center. There was one kid, who was about 14 or 15 years old, and he had been involved in a gang initiation that resulted in someone's death. 2 days after the kid got to the center, he kept saying there was someone bothering him at night. Everyone thought he was full of crap until there was something on one of the cameras for that cell block. At 3 a.m., there was a misty figure outside the kid's cell, and it looked like it was reaching through the bars. The misty figure only appeared on one camera, and the next day, the kid had a bruise on his face that resembled an injury from being hit with a pipe. I was employed at John Glenn High School, located in Norwalk, California. The school is nice, and I have a good feeling when I work there in the day. Yet, it has a dark and sad history. In 1997, there was a self-ending, and at some point in the 60s or 70s, someone ran on campus with a shotgun, and it went off, ending the person in the process. One night, I was cleaning up after a soccer game and was filling up my mop bucket. I swear I saw something peek around the corner at me while I was filling up. Others have told me that they have seen random movements in the dark and have felt an awkward feeling in the same area of the tragic incident. My dad's workplace is haunted. To begin, my dad works at a local clinic on a Navy installation in my town. The place is really old and reeks of asbestos and isopropyl alcohol, and when you walk through it, the air surrounding you almost seems to graze your skin as you move. The place is just really creepy. The clinic has a storage room connected to a set of offices that used to be the morgue. On occasion, there would be something odd or off-putting in there, like unused dental trays with traces of rust, or a rather foul odor would hang over the place. The whole place was like something out of a video game. My experience took place when I was about 8 or 9 years old, after hours when my dad was working overtime. My dad was going to a coworker's office across the building, and because the building creeped me out, I went with him. When we were walking, he hung a turn and began to head towards the storage room door to take a shortcut to the office. Even the door was creepy, as the small windows on the front were covered in yellow and black caution tape to stop nosy patients from peeking inside. As we entered, the temperature dropped a good 5 degrees. The whole place got really cold and really quiet. As my dad was walking along, I hung behind, a little sluggish from being a bit unsettled. My dad, or what I thought was my dad, called my name to speed me up. The first red flag I noticed was that the voice came from behind me. As I looked back, I saw a bit of movement, but I dismissed it as the light of the fluorescent lamps dancing over the metallic objects scattered about. Moving on, I began to feel deeply unsettled, like someone distant was watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed more movement, this time in the direction of one of the shelves. At this point, I was stopped dead in my tracks by fear. Small crackling sounds, like speaker feedback, began to fill the surrounding air. Soon, my actual dad called for me to hurry up, and I gathered my senses and hurried along, trying not to focus on the little popping sounds as much. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm sure it was connected to that room being a morgue at one point. I shared this here to see if someone may be able to help me in figuring out why exactly this stuff happened to me and why my dad couldn't hear it. There was an incident from my hometown that made news, and it made believers out of many. A young mom and her infant were driving home from a friend's house at night when she crashed her car, which ended upside down in a river. The following day, a fisherman saw the car and called emergency personnel. When law enforcement officials went down the embankment to the crash site, 4 different officers heard a distinct voice calling, "Help me, help me." Hearing the voice caused them to work frantically and to flip the car over and find the 18-month-old baby alive. The crash occurred approximately 14 hours prior, according to Lee reports. I still get chills when I pass the crash site. Note the mother almost instantly succumbed to injuries sustained in the crash. Rescuers had no idea where the voice was coming from. I worked at a hospital, and there were ghosts rumored to be there. One was that of a small child. The story was you would go through the pediatric section at exactly 11:33 p.m., and you could hear him crying. Bah, I thought. It's peds, and someone's always crying. Didn't give it another thought until one day the unit was shut down because of no patients. I was walking through the area, and right on cue, I heard someone crying. I searched through every room, but I never did find the source. Another ghost was somehow associated with the elevators. You could be standing right next to one, and it would randomly stop on your floor and open up. No one is inside, and no one pushed the call button. If you went inside, you'd push the button for the floor you wanted. The doors would close completely, hesitate for a moment, then open back up. The doors will close again, and the elevator will take you to the ground floor whether you want to go there or not. If the belief holds that a ghost will haunt the place where it died, then hospitals ought to be the most haunted places there are. I was an Air Force firefighter at Kadena Ab in Okinawa. For those that aren't into history, we bombed Okinawa back to the Stone Age in World War II. Many stories exist about civilians ending themselves to escape the feared atrocities committed by military personnel. This means lots of ghost stories and creepy stuff. I heard this story secondhand. One of our stations was allegedly haunted. It had dispatch set up in a tower on top of the station that looked out onto the flight line. We weren't super busy, especially at night, and there was a way the lone dispatcher could key up a radio and carry another radio outside on a smoke break so they could still hear phones or radio. A dispatcher is climbing the stairs one night after his break and claims that he saw a woman in all white coming down the stairs. Whatever he saw scared him so much that he abandoned his post and ran across the runways to get away from it. While I don't think he was charged, those could be multiple very serious crimes for military personnel. The flight line is a restricted area. If security forces saw him running on the runway, he could have been shot. I think that shows how scared he truly was. We had a house on base that was the site of 2 separate familicides. There was an agreement with the military to contract any construction work to Okinawan companies. However, the Okinawans would not demolish the house due to their apprehensions regarding paranormal phenomena. My first engineer said that when he worked in dispatch, he'd get 911 calls from that house, and there'd just be breathing on the other end of the line. No one would say anything. There was also a daycare next to the house, and people said kids would wave at it when no one was there. Something weird happened to me last night. It wasn't scary, but I can't explain it. I work in an elementary school and was alone in the building cleaning the boys' restroom. The restrooms are designed without entry doors from the hall and with sinks between the boys' and girls' areas. The boys' room has 2 stalls and 1 urinal. I cleaned the toilets with a C3 machine and a Johnny mop and then flushed the toilet. As I was pushing the C3 machine to the sink area, I heard a light plop in the water. For some reason I didn't think about it because I work with one earbud in. When I went back to the stall to wipe the walls, there was a new colorful pencil in the water. I cannot figure out how it got there. There is nothing above where it could have fallen from, and the stall walls are too far from the toilet for it to fall into the water. Not scary, but weird. For many years, I worked at a very large level 1 trauma center, in an ICU that specialized in people with neurological injuries and needed critical care. We had this one particular patient who was a beautiful young woman. She also happened to be one of the pharmacists in the hospital. She presented with an unusual neurological presentation that quickly deteriorated into an almost comatose state. Yet occasionally she would do this weird thing. She would rear up, as if her body would be there doing things, but she wasn't really interacting. It reminded people of a puppet, and it was disconcerting. I did not provide care for her directly. I was usually assigned other patients or in charge of the ICU. I did get to witness one episode when I was asked to drop off a supply to the nurse in the room. I walked in and spoke to the nurse. The patient went from lying flat and breathing irregularly to rapidly bending up at the waist, with her arms tied to the side of the bed. Usually a patient in that condition will grab at things or struggle in a disorganized way. Her action was unexpected / out of the blue, and she looked at me very intently, and then she literally flopped back down. It was like a scene from a movie, or like if you have seen videos of people who do weird things when asleep. I can only describe the atmosphere in that room as oppressive. We see some weird patient presentations for critically ill neurological patients, but this was not like anything any of us ever remember seeing. The family, who came from Caribbean islands, kept insisting that she needed an exorcism from the beginning of her stay in our ICU. The doctors were like, "Ma'am, while we respect your beliefs, we don't do that here." Eventually, after ruling out every possible medical scenario, the medical team agreed to allow the exorcism. I made sure I was scheduled off that day because I didn't want whatever it was in her to come find me. When I came back from my time off, I asked about the patient, and they told me she immediately began to improve after the exorcism and had improved to the point they were able to transfer her out of the ICU to a step-down unit. I wasn't directly involved, but everyone in the ICU knew about it, and I'll never forget it. This happened sometime between 2005 and 2012 when I worked there. I don't remember the exact year. But I'm pretty sure that they probably couldn't get away with that now that things are a lot more corporate algorithm driven for plans of care than they used to be. At one of our multi-site locations, there's a basement with a long hallway that has doors on its sides and turns off into another hallway at a right angle. The hallway looks like the haunted hospital corridor that came to your mind first when you read that. At night, half the lights are automatically turned off. At the end of the second hallway, through a couple of doors, there's a room where the company stores extra chairs, but they're lined up perfectly and facing the same direction, so it looks like you found the secret cult meeting spot. At 3 a.m. that's plenty creepy enough, but going beyond that room there's another small hallway with a downward sloped ramp leading to a storage area that's almost a crawl space. By now you're deep in a dead end, but there's one more fun room left that this has been building up to. This last room looks like it was unfinished when the building was constructed. The walls, floor, and ceiling are dirt-colored concrete, and the walls are scarred like something big has been sharpening its claws on the wall. There's no purpose to the room, it just exists in that state, and no one ever talks about it. In the middle of the room is a chair with a hard hat sitting on it, both of which are, usually, right under a bare hanging light like what you'd see in an interrogation room. I say usually because every time we go down there, the chair is in a different location within the room. It changes position almost every night, even on the weekends, when there are no employees to move it around. I've been on the site for 4 years, and none of the other guards have lasted long enough to move it around on their own, so it's not an inside joke for someone to be getting their giggles. The room is haunted by a chair. Shadow people. I currently work in loss prevention at a distribution center in the US. I have worked here for several years and have had several paranormal experiences in one particular building. Just the one. The first time I ever experienced anything was a full-body apparition of a shadow person walking out the end of one of our storage areas. I have also seen boxes come flying off shelves at random. You will hear loud bangs and noises out of nowhere. I have also had an experience with something running up behind me, but no one was behind me when I turned. In fact, directly behind was a stack of boxes on a pallet and no way for someone to be behind me. Finally, I have seen a shadowy figure slithering across the floor in the opposite direction of my movement, and you will feel a sense of being watched from the moment you enter the production floor until you reach the lobby. The lobby feels completely normal, the production floor has something going on. My work is in an old hospital, and I think it's haunted. I work in a residential treatment center for teens and kids. I experienced some weird things when I worked overnights there. I now work days, and there is one room in particular that the kids always dislike. So when I worked overnights, one girl moved into the room from another room and would always state how she couldn't sleep in her new room because she felt like she was being watched. Months after she was discharged, we had another girl move into this room. This room is different than the others, and the bathroom sticks into the room and makes a visual barrier between the main section and the sink area. She had moved her comfy chair over by the sink instead of by her bed/window. When I asked her why she wanted it way over there, she said she feels like someone sits there and watches her at night. Now just recently I had a third resident, who was not here when these two girls were here, say that she doesn't like her new room. We have 6 rooms on the unit, and this is the 4th room she has been in. The other night I took her to the kitchen for some positive time, and she admitted she didn't want to go to bed. I inquired as to why, and she said she has a hard time sleeping in there because she feels watched. She said she has been closing her shades at night, but it hasn't helped. She said she never felt this way in any of the other rooms. This room is also next to our family room, where at night a clock flew off the wall and landed several feet away. While working a graveyard shift at this place in CA, I was walking through this building at around 2:45 a.m., and a damn air compressor turned on, breaking the silence and freaking me out. Went to investigate, although every bone in my body wanted to get the duck out. There was no real explaining why or how this thing came on. The only way was to flick the switch to the on position. And it was sturdy. I tried to put it at a halfway point to see if maybe someone hadn't turned it off all the way, but it was impossible. When I realized that the hair was standing up on my neck, I quickly left after unplugging the device. I had worked there for a month on all graves and never had any incidents or occurrences similar to that one. Maybe something just wanted to say hello, or it just wanted to let me know I wasn't alone. A large male ghost rushed up on me. I was doing some highly specialized artistic work in a repurposed building from the 1800s. The building is in a major US city. I was hired to work overnight to complete the job by the morning. The space has only been in use for approximately 3 years after being empty for who knows how long. My work is so specialized that the place hired a security guard to stay with me while I completed my project. He and I were the only 2 people in the building from about midnight forward. At our first meeting I even joked with him about ghosts. He had a history working there and said it wasn't haunted. I believed him. I'm a pretty tough lady and have had little unexplained experiences through my life in places that have a history. The thing I typically see is little shadows or sometimes figures out of the corner of my eyes. These artifacts simply vanish if I try to focus on them. I don't see these things in everyday life, so I'm not hallucinating. I'm not even sure if I'm physically seeing them or if it's more extrasensory. It only happens in places that have the energy. I've also had my name called and been touched but never felt imposed upon or like whatever it was trying to scare me. I never got that spooked. During my project, I saw the little shadows and flutters in the place out of the corner of my eyes. I recognized what it was immediately. Maybe a little bit haunted. Nothing prepared me for what happened at about 4:30 a.m. I had been cranking away on my work for hours. It was going great. I was in my flow, headphones on. Everything was turning out exactly the way I wanted. I was rummaging through my tools, eyes towards the ground, when I was rushed by a not particularly tall but stout figure of a man. I instantly thought it was the security guard, who was a substantial guy but not familiar enough with me to be goofing around like that yet. Just as soon as the thought that it was the security guard entered my mind, I caught a glimpse of the man's outfit. It looked like a very old priest's robe with a collar. A moment later, he had vanished. The way he vanished was exactly like what I usually see, but he was much closer. Instantly the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. I had the impulse to toss my tools and run out the door, but I just stood there. I started to feel more excited than scared when I realized what had happened. I think that ghost was trying to spook me, but I didn't feel anything too malicious about it, so I walked to go see if I could find the security guard and tell him what happened. Instead I just peeked in on him when I decided that he might think I'm nuts if I tell him. For the final few hours of my project, I was pretty hypervigilant in the space, but nothing else happened. I did feel like I was being watched but ignored it. My bosses were extremely happy with my work, and I did tell a few friends about my experience the next day. I know there must be other people who have experienced things in that space. It's totally haunted. I've worked in the same building for 12 years. It was totally rebuilt from the previous building only a couple of years before I started, so it has little history. One night I thought I heard someone call my name on patrol while alone. After review, it was likely a chirping fire door from a distance. However, another time I was alone in the security camera office. The access keycard lobby doors are a few feet away. I'm watching a movie on my mini DVD player. It's Paranormal Activity. All of a sudden, right when I'm totally invested in the film, The access portals flip open and shut a few times. I freaked. No explanation, really. I mean, it happens every once in a great while when someone scrapes the sensor with a card or drips some coffee on the card reader, but this was insane when the building was empty and they hadn't been used in several hours. I had an interesting experience as a security guard. So I work at a golf and country club as a security guard. I was working, and I got an alarm check call around 3 p.m. Thinking nothing of it, I went to check the house. I did a 360-degree check around the outside, but the alarm was still on. I went to get the key to the house, and I turned off the alarm when I was inside. The residents go home for the summer, so no one lives in the home right now. I did a check of the inside, all except the last room, the master bedroom. As my foot touched the threshold of the room, I heard a set of 3 knocks from behind me. I turned abruptly and thought, what the? Then almost in response there were another 3 knocks. Needless to say, I got the duck out. Any thoughts? I worked the night shift at NORAD from 4:30 p.m. to 7:15 a.m. with arming, disarming, guard mounting, and remounts. The security systems on our fence line were down for whatever reason, and we opened another static post on the south entrance into the mountain. Echo 5. It was a one-man post in the dark tunnel with nothing but your sidearm and an office chair. Surrounded by rock. The tunnel branched off to a huge metal door that was sealed. We'd all go relieve ourselves back there by the door so as not to bother our mobile unit because it was a huge trouble for them to come down. While back in that branch, you never stepped foot into the dark. It was a perfect demarcation line, where the light stopped, and then another 20 feet to the door. You'd hear whispers and banging back there at random times. Remember, night shift. No one was in there but us. And I never figured out how to get to the other side of that door anyway. So, one night, I'm sitting, freezing in my chair, and I hear voices the opposite way from this door down the tunnel near the exit, where it's completely blocked from any traffic. No vehicle or pedestrian traffic can even get onto that side of the mountain. Yet, I hear voices. I look toward the huge steel gate and see it. A full-bodied apparition walks out of the rock wall on the west side, steps/glides across the tunnel, stops, looks at me, turns to the east, and walks through the other wall of the tunnel about 100 feet before the gate. So definitely inside the restricted area. Thankfully, I knew this might happen and didn't freak out too bad because my buddy a few months prior actually discharged his firearm into a squad they had parked down there for the post to warm up in if needed. He saw the same thing but decided to shoot at it from behind cover. Idiot. It was a black mass in the shape of a man. It was almost like swirling particles of black? There was depth to him. Somewhat transparent. You could see the mass moving, with some areas appearing more transparent than others until it shifted, resembling a cloud but confined within a human shape. It's almost like nanotechnology in the movies, but this was definitely not any sort of physical element. I couldn't tell what he was wearing by the shape, although he definitely had a hat on and was wearing boots. No color whatsoever. Just a black swirling mass. As I think about it more, I remember the bulb lights that run through the tunnel flickered, grew brighter, and hummed loud as hell just before this happened. Another story. Echo 4 is the same tunnel, but the main entrance is on the northern side. A bus runs non-stop, day and night, to bring people in and out of the mountain. I'm checking IDs and watching House on my laptop. I snuck through security to curb the boredom overnight. It's 2008. 09? We called this phenomenon the phantom bus. It's when you're sitting at your post and you hear the bus coming. It never shows. You will still hear it. It gets louder as if it's about to round the corner into visibility, but it never shows. And then silence for a moment until you hear it again, and finally the actual bus shows up. Mind you, this tunnel was only maybe a half mile, or 3/4, Ike. So once you hear it enter, it should take less than 3 minutes. I'd hear the bus enter 2, 3, 4, or 5 times before it actually entered. On slow nights it would sit behind the building outside until someone showed up. Anyways, the bus finally shows up one night, and I'm eyeballing it from behind the glass to see if I'll need to get up and check IDs. And stop my show, of course, because UCMJ. One guy was sitting in the back of the bus, which I thought was odd. So I pause my laptop that's sitting on a milk crate under the desk and wait. The bus backs out, turns around, and leaves. I'm waiting. No one comes. I lean over to get a good look at the bus stop, and there's a guy standing in there looking down. I can't see his face. I'm like, okay, whatever, maybe he forgot something in his car in the lot. The bus comes back. It leaves. I lean over and look, and he's still standing there. Hasn't moved at all. So I decide I better investigate because WTF? So I walk out of the post, and he's not blocked by the corner of a tunnel wall. I peek around the corner, no weapon ready of course, and no one's there. What the hell? I search the small bus stop but find nothing. I run down the tunnel to a point where I can see the exit, nobody is there. He couldn't have left the area without me seeing him. The bus returns, and I ask the driver, has anyone come in here in the last hour? Nope, quiet night, he says. I smoke a cigarette, not anymore, and go back to watching house. I'm a security guard for a distribution warehouse in a rural area. We're on site 24/7, even when the warehouse personnel leave for the night. Once they're gone, whatever guard is there is the only human around for miles. Now, we're stationed in this little guard shack at the front of the truckers area. It's your standard shack, the front and back have large glass windows. The sides have sliding glass doors. On the nights I've worked there, it gets downright creepy. Nothing moving except for the occasional rabbit or deer. You'll hear a coyote howl every once in a while. And almost every night the fog rolls in. It creeps over the hill and slithers down, almost like a living thing. Your imagination can run wild at times, those bits of fog in the front start to look like tendrils seeking out prey. But that's not the creepy thing, that's expected. What's creepy is when you're sitting there, all alone except for the animals. And you see someone walk past you in the reflection off the glass, knowing you're supposed to be the only person within miles of the place. So you spin around, only to find there's no one behind you. You race to the window to see if they're past the shack, no one's there. Then you check the recordings, no one shows up on them either. While it's not an every night thing, it happens enough that all of the guards have experienced it at one point or another. And it's not a reflection of animals moving, the gate is wrong, and the colors aren't animal colors. Skinwalker sighting in Haystack, New Mexico. My brother told me this story. It occurred during the early 2000s, smartphones had not been invented yet, only crappy flip phones with sketchy cellular service. My brother was an electrician, a journeyman. He was employed in a small border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup is located on the edge of the Navajo Nation Reservation, in an area known as the Checkerboard Area, which is characterized by designated plots of land that alternate between being part of the res and not, resembling a checkerboard pattern. There is a large population of multiple tribes in the area, such as Navajo, Pueblo, Zuni, etc. My brother and a Chinese-American co-worker were the only two on call one night. A power line goes down or something catastrophic happens like that in the middle of nowhere, outside of Gallup towards the Continental Divide. He receives the call in the early morning hours shortly after 1 a.m. The co-worker had recently become the father of a newborn but desperately needed the hours. My brother calls him, and they agree to meet up at the company stockyard. My brother waits about an hour or so, his co-worker still hasn't shown. It is strict company protocol to never go on jobs alone, always in pairs or more, due to the hazardous nature of high-voltage lines and electricity in general. My brother's co-worker calls to inform him that there is a problem with the newborn, and he needs to take his wife to the ER. He will meet my brother on site, which is another violation of company policy. They are strictly instructed to show up to the job site in the company vehicles, which are equipped with tools required for the job and all that. My brother understands and doesn't want his co-worker to be docked pay or written up for violating company policy. Against his better judgment, he heads out alone. The job site is quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The power line spanning across the vast desert with red rock mesas in the far distance, in the daylight at least. At nighttime it is pitch black in the New Mexican desert. Only dirt roads and no houses or streetlights for miles. None could be seen along the entire horizon. He waits for his coworker as long as he cares. He figures he'll assess the damage on his own, and by the time his coworker shows up, he'll have a solution. He suits up and begins crawling the tall wooden pole. The company truck is parked facing towards the pole. The high beams illuminated the base and subsequent foreground. He reaches the top of the pole. Some time passes as he is trying to calibrate the issue or solve the problem, the power outage. Something on the ground below him catches the corner of his periphery. He looks down in disbelief and shock as his mind tries to make sense of what he is seeing. He described it as a man crawling on all fours wearing the skin of a coyote, the skin draped along its back with the limbs like deadweight dangling towards the ground. He watches as the creature patrols the area. He said he witnessed the skinwalker encircle the truck with smaller and smaller orbits. Eventually, the creature stood up on 2 feet and peered inside the driver's side window of the truck. He described the motions of the skinwalker and said it was moving as if it was confused as to what was going on or where the driver of the truck was. From his vantage point, he could infer that the skinwalker was male and painted with black paint and white clay. Then on the horizon he could see headlights, His coworker was en route. The skinwalker also noticed the headlights but did not realize that the narrator was up on the power line pole. As his partner approached closer, the skinwalker ran off into the dark on all fours. The rest of the trouble call was uneventful regarding the skinwalker. I was a security guard at a large office building when I was out of college. Most of my job was to watch security cameras for anything suspicious, etc. Anyway, the night goes on, and around 2 in the morning I look at a camera that was pointed towards the security room door that leads into the room I was currently in. The camera has a view of the room outside the door, and I see a person standing in the corner of the room furthest from the camera. The person was looking straight at the camera. I cautiously look out the door and see no one in the corner, look back to the camera, and see the person still in the corner but now looking towards me in the doorway. There was nothing causing a shadow or whatever to make it look like there was a person there. I even had a sense of dread when I started walking to the corner. I just closed the door, locked it, and remained in there until morning. The person remained in the corner looking at the door for another couple seconds until it vanished once I blinked. I didn't stay at the job for long after that incident. A close friend worked at a very large and historic nursing home in our area. He said he constantly saw elderly people skittering by in the hallways, only to turn around and find no one there. He also saw a very old woman going out the roof access door one morning. He was at the opposite end of the hallway, so he chased after her because the saddest patients would often sneak up there and jump. It is a 10-story building, BTW. So he bursts through the door expecting her to be fairly close to the other side. She was basically ancient from his description, so very slow, and there was no one on the roof at all. He ran from edge to edge looking for her on the ground below. There was nothing at all. So I work in a group home for the developmentally disabled, and my usual shifts are the overnights, which begin at 11 p.m. and end at 9 a.m. the next day, and oh boy, let me tell you, this ducking place is haunted, I swear to God. I've been working here for a solid 6 months now, and some pretty strange things have happened. In the first few months, 4.5 to be precise, nobody lived in the basement apartment of the home, and whenever you go down there, it's creepy. Also, to mention, this is a furnished basement apartment with its own kitchen, living room, bathroom, and bedroom meant to house clients that book for a certain amount of time. Whenever it is empty, it consistently appears as though there is something present beneath, whether it be the sound of a person speaking or walking or the noise of doors closing. As a result, I keep the door connecting the basement to the top floor locked. But that doesn't stop whatever is down there. One night, while I was awake, I heard solid, heavy footsteps making their way upstairs to the top, followed by the sound of the door handle trying to turn. This experience nearly triggered an anxiety attack and led me to text my coworker, who was unhelpful as she began sharing her experiences with the house that were very similar to mine. After the 4.5 months since I started working, we have a client who permanently moved into the basement, the best thing to ever happen. Why? Because we just chalk all the noises up to them now. However, one shift I was working, they asked if I could go downstairs and help them. I descended to the lower level, and we engaged in conversation, during which they mentioned that they occasionally believe the basement is haunted. What? They mentioned that they sometimes hear footsteps and that one night they heard someone turn on the lamp in the living room, specifically the click of the string being pulled. Another incident is when the client wasn't home, and due to certain policies and reasons, we keep cameras in the upstairs and downstairs apartments and the living rooms. I was on the phone with my boss as the upstairs camera stopped working, and they were guiding me on how to reset it. While waiting for it to boot up, they checked the camera downstairs and asked me to go do a quick check on the client. I told them the client wasn't home, but my boss said they heard footsteps and coughing. I can tell you right now it was none of the clients upstairs, as they were sitting down on the couch the entire time watching TV, and none of them had coughed. So I hurried downstairs with my boss on the phone, and as I said, no one was there. Completely insane. The next thing to recently happen was the little ducking black cubed alarm clock that we have. This alarm clock we keep upstairs goes off at 6 p.m. to remind staff that it is med time. Well, on my overnight I'm lying in the dark while on my phone just browsing through social media, when the radio of the clock turns on, the volume slowly goes up, then quickly goes back down and shuts off. I unplug that crap. It's in a separate room. I'm done with these overnights. Haunted Barracks sold my belief in the paranormal. I enlisted for basic training earlier this year. Within the first week of our instruction, individuals began reporting frequent nightmares and the sensation that someone was observing them from a distant corner during the night. During my fireguard shifts, the bay did feel a bit off. As time progressed, individuals began to make increasingly exaggerated claims, but I remained skeptical until one night when I observed the motion sensor activate in the corner. Everyone claimed to feel someone while nobody was there. That same night, while I was cleaning the bathrooms, I kept hearing the stalls slam shut even though nobody was there. My buddy also told me that he experienced sleep paralysis and saw someone in the corner of the bay, while all the lockers kept opening and slamming by themselves. Following this, a guy claims someone keeps waking him up at 3 a.m., standing near his bed. After a few nights, I'm doing laps around the bay, and when I walk by his bunk, out of my periphery, I see someone standing over him, so close to me I could reach out and touch him. I look over, and as I'm about to ask what they're doing, the figure is gone. After this incident, I sat at the front desk with my friend, who was also on guard, and we witnessed the safety latch slam shut by itself, causing the door to fling open into the wall with such force that it dented the surface before slamming shut again. Later that week, we discovered that one of the paper towel dispensers in the bathroom was loose, and when we pulled it out, we found an old Ouija board inside. After throwing it away, everything stopped overnight. Just thought you guys might enjoy the story. I work security on the graveyard shift in a hospital. These are a few events that I can't explain. So I've worked as a security officer for going on 4 years now in this hospital. It's a very old hospital, and only the ER is open 24/7. The rest of the hospital closes at 1900. I've had several things happen that I simply cannot explain, but since I am a skeptic, I always try to rationalize them. These are my true experiences and not fabricated. These are in no specific order. 1. I was coming out of my office when I spotted someone dressed in all black at the very end of the hall. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, just a black, human-shaped figure. I saw it for only a second or two before it quickly darted into a doorway. I ran towards it, and the doorway was empty and the door was locked. The only way in is with a key, and I was the only one in that part of the hospital that night. I, of course, went into the office, but no one was inside. 2. One night at around 2, I was sitting at my desk in the security office. The office has a closet located within arm's reach of where I'm seated. Out of nowhere there were 2 very loud and very distinct bangs on the closet door that sounded like they came from the other side. It was so distinct that I actually remember the noise coming from the upper right-hand part of the door. It nearly gave me a heart attack, and after I fell out of my chair, I opened the closet door and found nothing inside that could have fallen or hit the door, just some old office supplies on a shelf. Still perplexed by this one the most. 3. I was getting off the elevator on the 3rd floor of the hospital when I heard some faint noise coming down one of the hallways. I followed the noise, and it got louder. Turns out in the last room down this hallway, the TV was on and set to max volume. This is an empty floor that is not being used during the day or night, so no one should be up here at any period of time. I turned down the volume on the TV, then switched it off. 2 hours later when doing a round, the TV was on again and set back to max volume. I repeated the routine and left. On my final round at 4 I found the TV on and maxed out again. This time I just unplugged it. 4. We have a small chapel in the hospital on the main floor. It's located in a hallway that can't be accessed by anyone after hours. I've seen this door open a few inches by itself once. It was latched, and I don't think the AC or a draft could twist the handle and unlatch the door. Another time, between rounds, I found the door standing wide open, even though it had been latched shut during the previous round. No idea. 5. This hospital had an older separate building located behind it that was once used as an end-of-life hospice throughout the early 1900s. It was shut down and later used as an office area for around 10 years before being demolished altogether just 2 years ago. It had 2 floors and did have an elevator. After the building was demolished, our security phone received several calls each week for about 3 months from the emergency phone of the now non-existent elevator. It's the button you would press if the elevator got stuck. It was always quiet on the other end, but I have no idea why it was ringing with that number. 6. When I am alone on a quiet floor, I sometimes hear random objects falling in different rooms or hear doors closing that I cannot identify. I once heard a woman or child crying very softly for about a minute, but I could not locate anyone. Again, no one should have been on that floor. I am not saying these are proof of anything paranormal, these are just an assortment of things that have happened to me that I can't explain with easy logic. I am a skeptic, but after working here, I do keep my mind a bit more open. I will answer questions if anyone has any. Security guard experience. I was a security guard for a company that contracted out to different places. I started at a building that was an old newspaper facility. The newspaper company moved to a new building but still had archives and whatnot in the old building. There was a security guard there 24 hours a day. I was on 3rd shift. We had to do rounds throughout the building each hour to make sure everything was secure and there were no security or safety problems occurring anywhere. There was only one guard there at a time. The doors were all locked so no one could get in without our knowing. My first night I was already nervous, being all alone in a building in the middle of the night, but what happened made it worse. I was doing a round in the basement. Out of nowhere I hear a voice say, clear as day, "It's okay, Sam. I am right here." I saw a shadow move along the wall. The hair on my arms was standing on end. I got out of that area as quickly as I could. This is 100% true and not fabricated in any way, shape, or form. The restaurant I work in is an old one, but I don't have much of any history on it. Haven't searched for it. I can tell you that we have a banquet room leading up a couple of sets of stairs, which we use frequently for weddings, parties, etc. This likely occurred a few weeks to a month into my job, around mid-September. I was asked to carry some dishes up to the banquet room so that we have them ready to go for the wedding party. No big deal, I carry said dishes up. Having to make several trips. Whenever I enter the banquet room, I consistently have a subtle sense that something is different. However, I didn't give it much attention because I was focused on my work. Just a note, I am an individual who is very in touch with how I feel and the vibes I get from people. At least that's what I believe, but I could also be mistaken, who knows? Anyways, a couple of weeks go by, and again I am asked to take some dishes upstairs. This was probably mid-October. Being the team player I am, of course I'm going to help my coworkers out. Absolutely, everyone, let's get to work. The feeling is stronger this time. It wasn't a sense of goosebumps or chills down my spine. It was simply a gut feeling that something was off. I finished what I needed to do and went downstairs to jokingly ask the waitress if she ever got a funny feeling upstairs. My boss turned the corner looking at me as the waitress answered, and with a giggly smile on her face, she said yes, this building, mainly in the banquet room upstairs, is haunted. She doesn't like going up there either. My boss, the one who turned the corner, told me about how a ghost hunting team had done an EVP in the past, where a voice said a bartender's name. Some other stories I've been told have mentioned bar stools being flipped over like it was closing time, as well as a blood-curdling scream heard out in the hallway, not even in the banquet room. What creeps me out the most about it is that I could feel something off without ever even knowing the building was haunted. It throws your senses for a whirl. I'm trying to distinguish whether it was a bad feeling, like I should avoid the banquet room while I'm alone, or if it's just my nerves getting the best of me. It's hard to tell whether or not it was an energy that disliked me or didn't want me there. Now that I know it's haunted, I have been dreading going to work because I know I'll have to go up there alone again. I make sure that I am not the last person to leave the building because I don't want to risk having an entanglement with the unknown. I also feel that I got that gut feeling as a warning sign. Something wasn't right, and my senses knew it. That kind of tells me to not be alone in that place. I'd love to hear any thoughts, questions, or advice from someone else who has dealt with this. So 4 weeks ago I picked up a security job at a retirement village. I work on the weekend evening shift from 3:30 to 11:30, so I've been training with different partners. One of my partners I've had normally works on the midnight shift. Flash forward to today. I'm working with the midnight shift guy when we find out a room on the 3rd floor of a residential building didn't have heat. The maintenance guy hears us mention the room number and says, "Oh, you mean the haunted room?" So my partner and the maintenance guy explain how years ago there was a woman who lived there who was into some kind of voodoo. They didn't go into explicit detail. The other night, apparently, the residents who live there now complained they got 3 phone calls to which no one was on the other end, only to have their door slammed shut. After recalling this, my partner told a story about how he had a partner on the midnight shift claim someone grabbed his shoulder on that floor, and from that day on he refused to go on that floor alone till the day he left. My partner also says he refuses to ride the elevator since it goes up and down / opens and closes on its own. Finally, while he has not seen these, there are rumors of people seeing a woman floating by the library and a cook appearing in the kitchen whenever a resident dies. My brother saw something terrifying at my dad's work, funeral home, when we were kids. So this didn't happen to me directly, but to my brother when we were little, and it's one of those stories that still gives everyone chills in my family. My dad went to mortuary school and worked as a funeral director when we were growing up. He's retired now. Sometimes my mom would take us to visit him at work or pick him up for lunch. It wasn't spooky or anything. It looked like just a small church with an office and chapel area. We were never around any bodies or prep rooms. Anyway, one day when I was around 7 and my brother was about 4, we were playing around the building while my mom talked to my dad. My brother ran off for a bit, and when he came back, he looked pale and absolutely terrified. Later he told us he opened a door and saw a young boy lying on a table, and that the boy suddenly rose up in flames and turned evil. We were super young, so we didn't really understand what my dad actually did for work. My parents told us years later that there actually was a young boy's body at the funeral home that day. And my mom, who doesn't mess around with ghost stories, said it genuinely scared her too. My brother firmly believes that the event truly occurred, and even now, my mom becomes anxious when discussing it. So what do you think? Could he have actually seen something paranormal? They always say children are more sensitive to these things. I'm a police officer who quit his job after a paranormal experience. I'm not a superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts or demons until now. Yeah, stuff happens that can't be explained. But I just want you all to know that it took more than a couple of flying spoons or a door opening on its own to scare me out of my job. Since the department didn't find any reason to keep this police report confidential, I will now give you everything I can about what happened on the scariest night of my life. We had just received word from dispatch to check out a noise complaint in a small neighborhood whose name I will not disclose for their privacy. It was me and my partner. Let's call him Paul, and I'll go by Mike. We arrived some time after midnight. The street is dead. Everyone is sound asleep at this point. We park our patrol car in front of the aforementioned house and exit the vehicle. We knock on the door and let our presence be known. Police. Is anyone home? A little girl, 8 to 10 in appearance, opens the door and peeks through the gap. Hey. I crouch to make myself less intimidating. Is your parent or guardian home? She shakes her head. My first thought was that she probably had the TV a little too high and woke up the neighbors. But before I could tell her to stay inside and lock the doors and then part, I heard the sound of crashing silverware coming from what I presumed would be the kitchen. The entire house was nearly pitch black. The girl answering the door and shaking her head let me know she was alone. Which makes whoever made that noise an intruder as far as I'm concerned. I asked the girl to step outside and turn to Paul. Paul, why don't you give her one of those lollipops you like to suck on when you're nervous? Paul gave me a cold stare as the girl giggled. Paul and the girl went to wait by the car while I slowly pushed the door all the way open. Police. If there is anyone in this house, please let yourself be known. Without a warrant, I had no right to enter the building. I tried my best to spot whoever made the noise, but it is too dark to see. Just any sign of a threat and I would be justified in searching the house. But nothing. I left the door open and headed back towards Paul and the girl. Hey again. I don't think we introduced ourselves. I'm Officer Mike. This is my partner Paul. If I may ask, what is your name? Maribel. That's a lovely name. So Maribel. Again, if I may ask. Where is your family? As soon as I had finished my sentence, the television in the living room turned on, volume fully up. Paul and I quickly turned in surprise and could see the television playing static from outside. We put Maribel in the back seat of the patrol car for her safety, as no civilians were allowed in the front seats. We then, against our better judgment, entered the house. We tried every switch in the house, but no lights came on. While wandering the house cautiously, I would catch a person standing in the mirrors. I thought it was Paul, but every time I looked behind me, Paul was nowhere to be found. As I returned to the front door along with Paul, we both jumped as running footsteps echoed down the hall. We detached our firearms and aimed them at the source. The footsteps got louder and got closer. But no one ever appeared physically. An invisible force began to toss lamps, chairs, and other items around as the footsteps approached us. We sprinted out of the house and waited by the front yard. The footsteps seemed to stop, followed by the police siren that went off. I ran to the car and silenced the siren. I looked back at Paul, who seemed shocked. You all right, Paul? He takes a lollipop out of its package and puts it in his mouth. Yep. I opened the rear door and checked up on Maribel. Are you okay? She nodded her head, so I walked back to Paul. I don't know what to make of this, he said. Yeah, me neither. No. Seriously. Ignore the running invisible man that knocked everything down for a second. All the family photos, pictures on the wall, he points at Maribel, she's not in any of them. So what are you thinking? The footsteps led outside. Then the siren goes off. There are a million buttons in that car. What are the chances? Paul. Are you trying to tell me that Maribel is haunted? How do you explain what we just saw? I'm sure there's an explanation. The TV turns on when we take Maribel outside, prompting us to check it out. Someone or something shows up in the mirrors but ducks away. I remember wanting to shut him up. Not because he wasn't making any sense. But because he was. I know you've seen it. It was prowling around. Then it runs outside and gets in the car. Tries all the buttons. I think a ghost is trying to get to the girl. I just stood there. Not sure what to say. Until Paul decided to start walking back towards the house. Paul, what are you doing? It only shows up in the mirrors. That's how we find it. I followed him inside and watched as he took a book from the counter and broke the nearest mirror. What's the matter with you? That's someone's property. It was difficult explaining what happened to the department without sounding like nut jobs. The police cameras, which we were betting on to prove our stories, had shut off the moment we entered the house. The entity, whatever it was, must have turned off the cameras while we were unaware. The only part of our story that our police captain took seriously was the girl, Maribel. The captain brought up a missing person report and asked us if this was the girl we saw. It was. It's been just a few days since I gave up the badge to save whatever little pride I could spare. I just ask whoever reads this and whomever it may reach, the next time a door opens on its own or things move by themselves in your home, check the mirrors. When I was younger, I was an assistant manager of a grocery/deli. One evening, I was closing with a minimal staff, 2 sandwich makers and the dishwasher. The sandwich guys left first. The specific dishwasher closing with me was known to be lazy and problematic, so I made sure to check his entire station before I cleared him to leave, including that his trash was taken out fully to the dumpster and not just left by our back door. It was clean and clear. I closed the store and locked the doors behind me around 10 p.m. Come 6 a.m. the next morning, I get a call from my boss asking what happened the night prior. I went through my usual routine and said nothing unusual. I was confused when he asked me in for a meeting before my shift started. The dishwasher and my sandwich makers were there too. He asked us all again what had happened and who threw the paint. We were all super confused, and no one confessed because, obviously, we had no idea what he was talking about. He told us all to get to work, and he'd find out by watching the cameras. After he sent the dishwasher and sandwich guys to the line, he pulled me to our back hallway. It's a long, narrow hall painted white from ceiling to floor with some metal collapsible shelves about 4 to 5 feet away from the back door. The shelves hold various paper goods and cleaning supplies. Recently, my boss used a can of half-used black chalkboard paint for a sign out front. There is one camera pointed down the long hallway at the front of the door. There is another camera on the outside of the door leading to the dumpster. So when he showed me the hall, I was in shock. There was dried black paint smeared all over the back door. He said he thought our dishwasher must have done it, and he was going to write him up and finally fire him after getting the video. I was honestly confused but kind of went along with it. Someone must have thrown the paint, right? Maybe I just missed it in my haste to leave. But the thing is, I had locked that door and had to place my hands on the handle and lock where paint had been dripped. A half hour later, my boss calls me back again. He's shaking and tells me to watch the video that he recorded. The video shows the evening unfolding exactly as my crew and I described. Until some point around 10:10 p.m. when the closed paint can on the top shelf flies off and slams into the back door, coating it in black paint. Nothing else from the shelf moves or falls. There is no one recorded in the hall before or after the can projected over 5 feet to the door. Creepy as duck. Did not close alone ever again. Left for office life shortly thereafter and haven't looked back. Strange activity in the hospital my mom works at. Today my mom told me a story that happened in December of 2019, which I found quite unsettling. Just for backstory, I'm from Catalonia, Spain. My mom is a doctor who works at a public hospital as a radiologist. She has no mental illnesses and is overall healthy, and the building is in good condition, no gas leaks, etc. So it went on like this. She has a friend who went to her workplace to have some mammographies done. Everything goes on as usual, and when they're done, my mom goes to an adjacent room's computer, room north degrees 4, where the images have been sent. She closes the door after her. No more than 30 seconds later, she hears the doorknob turning violently, as if someone tried to enter the room. At first she thought it was her friend, so she yelled, "Come in." Note that the doors have lead protection to avoid ionizing radiation piercing through, but the knob kept turning. They were shaking it as well, so she yelled again, "Come on in." And thought how rude of them to act like this. It was then when she realized her friend couldn't be there as she was putting her clothes back on, and there was no way she already had. She explicitly told me she knew there would be no one behind that door once she opened it. So that was it. She quickly opened the door, but nobody was there. There have been a couple more incidents around that room, too. For example, one night there were 2 doctors with my mom when suddenly one of her co-workers witnessed an ecography gel bottle flying at extreme speed against a wall. There was nobody there, besides the 3 of them. They were all astonished. I know this sounds a bit too cliché-like, maybe because I'm not experienced, but I can assure you that she didn't make this up. One of her coworkers says there's something wrong with that floor as well. I don't know what to think, really. I often tell people if they don't believe in ghosts, they should work overnight security in an empty or abandoned building. About a year and a half ago I was assigned the overnight shift at an abandoned building, yay! And I particularly loved this site, as nothing ever really happened here, and the new owners of this building were awesome, even offering to buy us anything we needed as long as we didn't ask for any vehicles, lol. This place was divided into 6 places we must patrol every hour, as we had to scan specific spots with a mobile device, and these spots were put in out-of-the-way places to make sure you actually step foot in specific areas. Many of these areas got dark AF, as there really wasn't any good light source besides the moonlight, so a decent flashlight would have trouble lighting the whole area, and there were always dark corners you felt you were being watched from, but besides the eerie feelings, there was nothing much going on. We also had to patrol the outside of this building, where one spot needed to be scanned, and all the guards thought it was unnecessary due to the fact that we can just step out the door and look at it, and we felt it was unnecessary to walk the 200 feet to scan it. Just about every guard felt as they were walking the 200 feet to and from the area that they were being watched from the second floor windows, but there was never anyone there. We had a desk in an office by the main entrance for the guards and a break room close by with a refrigerator and microwave. The refrigerator was almost never used, as we had a mini fridge in the office, but the microwave was always being used. Now I don't know how other guards dealt with the microwave, but every time I finished using it, I would keep the door open with some excess time on the clock just in case I needed to use it again. I could just close the door and not input anything into it. One night, I decided it was time to eat and follow my routine before returning to the office to relax, when I suddenly heard footsteps. My first thought was, crap, someone snuck in and is trying to explore or mess things up. I walk as quietly as possible towards the break room, as this is where I heard the steps. As I get closer, I hear the microwave door close and the microwave begin to heat something. At this point I'm close enough to make myself known to the suspicious individual who decided to have lunch in this shithole and lucked out on finding a functioning microwave. As I reveal myself, I find no one in the room, the microwave shuts off, the door swings open to reveal nothing inside, and then I hear quick scampering through the AC vents that sounds like something big. At this point, I'm almost crapping myself, and then, as the scampering stops, I hear a loud groan booming through the AC vents and then silence. I slowly walk back to the office while clutching the non-existent gun in my hip, as this was an unarmed site. I make it back and lock the door and try to think rationally to no avail, then the mobile device rings, scaring the hell out of me, as it's now time to make another round. A friend of mine worked in a nursing home at night in a rough neighborhood. He asked me to pick him up after work, as he didn't have a car at the time. I show up earlier than expected. He tells me to come in and chill in the break room until he's finished with his stuff at the front desk. Mind you, this place is old, built in the 70s. As I'm sitting at a table, I hear a bing sound, and my buddy gets up. He comes by and says, "I'll be back, someone needs help using the bathroom." He walks down a long hallway past the break room. Keep in mind he's by himself, it's 3:40 a.m., his relief isn't there yet, he's assisting maybe 10 elderly, they're all asleep, and I confirmed this with him. As I'm watching videos on my phone, I'm not watching the door. Suddenly I hear very quick footsteps run past the door and towards the front desk. Thinking it was my buddy, I get up and go towards the desk, there's no one. My friend is walking back from down the hallway as I hear him close a door behind him and his footsteps. This cold air came at me, it felt like someone sprinted past me. Goosebumps aplenty when that happened. I told my buddy I'd wait in the car right after that. He's told me he's heard of others experiencing stuff like that there. He hadn't experienced it himself till then. I refused to go back. The ghost of a woman's grandfather on a homestead and something more menacing in the woods. I work for a wastewater management company on Vancouver Island and drive a vac truck for the company. I pump septic tanks and grease traps all over the island. It's a great job, and it allows me to see some really cool spots and some really creepy spots. Yesterday, I attended a job that took me to a location that was equally intriguing and unsettling. On Friday, December 10th, I had a job in Cobble Hill on Lafron Road. I arrived at the address and, as per company policy, parked at the top of the driveway and walked down to inspect said driveway prior to driving the truck to the tank location. It was about a 4-minute walk through a pretty densely forested area, but the driveway was well used, so I wasn't worried about the truck getting stuck. I got about 50 meters from the actual house/houses on foot before determining I had sufficient room to drive the truck down and turn around in their driveway. I saw 3 houses, 2 of which were newer and one that looked to be the original homestead shack on the property. I turned around and began walking back to the truck, all the while on the phone with my dispatcher, informing her that I was on site. Once back at the top, I quickly got back in my truck, started it up, and began driving down the narrow, winding driveway towards the house. As I approached the main house in the truck, I saw an elderly gentleman standing in the shack doorway. He gave me a brief wave, and I waved back as I was situating the truck into position. After a 5 or 6 point turn in the driveway, I had my truck's rear end facing the tank that was visible from the cab of my truck as I was pulling in. I got out and quickly assessed that it would only be 2 hoses off the truck to the tank, a short pull as it's known in the business. After moving some old flower pots off of one of the lids I needed to access, I was able to get the tank emptied and rinsed in about 25 minutes. The whole time I had my back to the shack and was prepared to take payment afterwards from the gentleman. I finished servicing the tank, got my hoses back on the truck, and fastened the lids in place. I then returned to the cab of my truck to grab my receipt booklet to take payment. I began walking to the doorway I had seen the man standing in, but the closer I got to the doorway, the more I began to see the shack was in a severe state of dilapidation, and there was absolutely no way there would have been anyone living in it. I checked the few windows I could see in, and the small shack was being used as storage for what looked like just junk. It was hard to tell what was in there exactly, but it was easy to determine it was not livable. I was confused because I recall waving at the man and seeing the door open behind him as he waved at me. Upon closer inspection I could tell that door hadn't been opened in some time. I got my phone out of my truck and noticed I had missed 5 calls from my dispatcher. I called her back, to which she informed me that the homeowner, whose house was directly beside the shack, had to leave and take her mother to the hospital. The mother also lived on the property in a house immediately beside the daughter's house. So, left to right, shack, daughter's house, and mother's house. My dispatcher then told me that the homeowner would like me to call right away, and I was given the number to do so. I quickly explained to my dispatcher I was trying to track down the fellow I had seen earlier to collect payment and jokingly said, "I think I've seen a ghost." We laughed, and I got off the phone and immediately phoned the homeowner. She picked up, and I explained who I was. She asked if I had found her tank, and I said it had been located, emptied, and her pump chamber rinsed, and that I was now trying to find the elderly gentleman I had seen earlier. To which she replied, "What elderly gentleman?" I then explained I briefly saw and waved to an old man standing in the shack doorway as I was pulling up in the truck and hadn't seen him since. There was a moment of silence on her end of the phone, and then she said, "No one else is there. Can you describe this man?" The hair on my neck stood up. I told her what I recalled seeing in the brief moment I waved at him, and then she said, "You're describing my grandfather, who died many years ago." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up even further, and I experienced a feeling I'd never felt before. It was a mix of terror and also excitement/confusion. She then informed me that the property is on indigenous land and that they have had multiple instances where elders' spirits had been seen on the property. She told me that I should feel safe and he was only there because of what had happened to her mother that morning. I felt relieved but still uneasy. We joked about there being a dog as well, but the dog was real, so don't be spooked by it if I see it in a window. The homeowner then asked me if I had located the second tank at her mother's house, which I had no idea about and had no work order for, but I assured her since I was there, I'd get it done anyways. She gave me directions for the tank over the phone, and I found it easily. I only had to move the truck a short distance to facilitate the pump out. No biggie. I got off the phone with the homeowner, moved my truck to the mother's house driveway, and proceeded to pull the hoses off my truck to the tank. The whole time my heart was racing. I was excited but scared. I kept looking across the 2 yards to the shack, and I'd get goosebumps. As I was pulling the hoses towards the tank and removing the tank lids, I was hearing footsteps in the woods around me. The sound was noticeable even amidst the falling rain. It was so noticeable that I stopped on 3 separate occasions to ask if someone was there or say hello. Obviously no response, but the sense of being watched by something or someone was so overwhelming it was almost giving me anxiety. I didn't feel comfortable having my back to the woods and was constantly looking around while I was working. I quickly finished the pump out, put the hoses back on my truck, and put the lids back on the septic tanks. I left a receipt on the daughter's front door and quickly got the hell out of there. I truly didn't feel like I was being watched with malicious intent, but I feel like if there was something there, it was definitely protecting the property. At one point I stopped working and grabbed a broom and swept the stairs going up to the front door just to show I wasn't a threat. I didn't ever feel a sense of calmness typically associated with witnessing the ghost of a loved one. Maybe because it wasn't a loved one of mine? I'm not sure, but I felt very anxious, and it's weird to say, but I felt almost overwhelmingly sad while I was on the property for almost 90 minutes. The homeowner explained to me she was grateful for what I witnessed, and I am too, but it's what happened at her mother's house after I had gotten off the phone with her that left me rattled. My grandmother used to work as a nurse, and she had a bunch of ghost stories. There was one about some disembodied voice yelling for the nurse from the bathroom. Though there was no one there, she found out the next day that a patient had once been taken to the toilet and forgotten about. She died yelling for a nurse. Another was about this old lady who kept insisting there was someone in her room trying to take her away. The old lady was freaking the duck out about it, but eventually she settled down because the man went to see Mrs. Whoever. Mrs. Whoever died that night. Oh, and apparently she and her mother could smell death, before it had already happened, obviously. I'm definitely not doing them justice, but I enjoyed them when I was a kid. I work in a 2-floor coffee store. Currently, since my country is still in lockdown due to the virus, COVID, we only accept takeaway orders, which means no one is allowed to stay inside, and access to the second floor is prohibited for everyone. My workmates and I have been working in the same store for 4 years so far. Only one of my workmates sometimes told us that she had heard some weird noises at night when she was cleaning during the night shift. But, because we had never heard anything, we dismissed it. When the lockdown started and our store was quiet with no noise of any customer, we started to hear noises that came from the second floor. These noises were like the noise that a chair or a table makes when you push it. A couple of months ago, after having heard those noises several times, a father and his toddler son came to the store. While the father was waiting for his order, the little kid was wandering around until he stopped by the stairs and stared at the second floor. The father asked his kid what was there, and the kid said he was watching the dead man that was upstairs. The young father didn't know what to say, and then they left, and my workmates were literally shocked. The last few weeks, or actually the last few months, the store was pretty quiet, and no one noticed any weird noise until today. We were only 3 people on the first floor. We again heard the noise of a chair moving, but this time it was louder than ever, plus the new noise of the air conditioner turning off and on. I am usually skeptical, so I am always thinking of all the possible logical solutions. Hence, the AC probably sounded due to a micro cut on the light supply, so it restarted itself. However, I can't really think of any reason for the noises of the chair because the sounds are as if someone were pushing them. Besides, the only building that is next to us is currently empty, so no noise can come from nearby buildings. I know I said I'm a skeptic. Nonetheless, having heard those noises, I am open to believing in new possibilities. The store is not too old. Might it be that one builder died and therefore his soul has been trapped there? We hadn't heard anything before because we were not in lockdown, so now that everything is quieter, we are able to hear the noises. Or maybe there was already a haunted house, and therefore my store is also haunted? I only hope that if my store is really haunted, the entity or whatever doesn't follow me to my house. I am a retail worker in Europe. A lot of buildings here are very old and have preservation orders, so it's very common to find big name brands inside buildings that are hundreds of years old. I work in a boutique that used to be a butcher's. I remember on my first tour of the place I found it a little spooky on the upper floors, especially when it came to the shaft that is still there from when they would lower the meat from the storage room to the shop floor. I came to work the other day, and my manager and coworker were behind the till serving people. I said hey and went upstairs to hang up my coat and bag. The stockroom is on the second floor, and often, if there's someone on duty in there, I hear them organizing clothing, hangers grating along racks and stuff. Hearing someone in there, I shouted out a hello, thinking it was a coworker, and went up to the staff room. I clocked in, came downstairs, and asked my coworker and manager who was in the stockroom today. They looked at me funny and said it was just us 3 today. There was nobody upstairs except me when I started ascending the staircase. I freaked them out so much they checked to see if someone had slipped in beyond the security door, which is very hard to do since it has a passcode and it is a very heavy door with a quick swing. We would definitely notice if someone had slipped in behind us. There was nobody up there, but I had heard a sound as if someone or something was present, similar to what I would expect if a coworker were inside. I have been racking my brain trying to think of a rationale for this, but I can't deny it was the sound of someone working in there. I am weary of going up there now. Not gonna lie. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this little contribution. I have had a few small paranormal experiences in my life, but this is definitely one I cannot factor in an explanation for. I worked in a nursing home for about 5 or so years. I heard, saw, and experienced things I could never explain. We had different levels of care at this place. From critical care, dementia care, and assisted living. This resident lived in the assisted living part of the building. This part of the building was rather new and had been constructed on the site of an old convent that had been demolished. One woman kept complaining about people in her room, constantly hitting the call light. She would say there was a man in her bed and she couldn't move. Or he would get angry. There were several times I would yell at said man to leave. Then other people started showing up, and she would describe their clothing. She kept saying she knew she sounded crazy. I would calm and assure her I understood. It got to the point where we were actually concerned about other people getting into her room. Could it be that the staff or someone else is interfering with her? However, why only her? Furniture started moving around her room, too heavy for her to even attempt. Lamps upside down. End tables stacked on counters. Any time I went in her room, I felt uneasy. The hairs on my neck would literally stand up, and paranormal stuff has never bothered me. This was different. It felt menacing. One day, it was almost the end of my shift. I had yelled at all the shadow people that day and escorted them out of her room several times. She seemed to think this helped, so I did it. Except, she called in a panic. She was mumbling very low, and I could hear panic in her voice. I had just left her room less than 10 minutes prior. I opened the door, and all of her chairs are lined up in the middle of the room. I walk around confused, just speechless. I asked if she did this or how it had happened. She stood there white. She just froze and kept staring. Through me, though, not at me. She mumbles, "They did." I ask her to repeat herself. She points behind me and says, "They did." I felt like my skeleton was about to jump out of my skin, and I just had this sudden wave of "you have to get out of here now." I asked if she could come with me to take a detailed complaint. Called another aide up to my area. This was a male coworker. We walked down the hallway to her room. We asked her to stay in the lobby for the time being. As my coworker and I walked into her room. All of her furniture is stacked in the middle of her room. I opened the door and audibly screamed. The guy with me took off running down the hallway and yelled, "Oh hell no." He quit about a week later. I quit about 8 months later. She was moved to a different room shortly after, and eventually she went into dementia care. Still to this day, this experience stays with me. The corporeal ghost encounter. Around 30 years ago, in my mid-teen years, I and my friend would walk around the neighborhood with a push mower and knock on people's doors whose yards needed mowing. I used to go by myself but got chased off a couple of times and a few other times tried to be lured inside. So my friend, who was about a year older and bigger than me, would tag along for protection. Not to mention if he helped and did half, I'd give him half of what I made. I usually charged $5 for an entire yard, front and back, but even at that price it would add up pretty quickly after a couple of yards. So I always had money for the weekends to go catch a movie, go to putt-putt golf, or go to the arcade. Finding yards wasn't always easy, but we always tried to find an elderly person first. It wasn't always a score, but I had the best luck with them. You could always tell too if they were older by the cars they drove, like the Crown Vics with handicap tags. Not to mention the older people usually tipped or would oftentimes give us a cold soda or some sort of homemade goodie. Plus they always would share their old-time stories with us. I learned back during their younger days that hills worked differently and were always covered in snow, especially on school days. Anyway, we came upon this older home that was way overgrown, so much so that it looked like it hadn't been mowed all year. This was around July, and mowing season for us started mid-April or so. Not going to lie, this house had a spooky and creepy vibe. We debated whether to stop or not, figuring the house was abandoned. Not only was the grass tall, but the bushes around the house were overgrown as well. I told my friend, "Just go knock real quick and see." As he walked up, he turned back to look at me with trepidation in his eyes, and I flashed him my hand 3 times and yelled 15. I was hoping to get at least that much. As he walked up and was near the porch, he suddenly stopped, startled by an old man sitting in a chair on the porch. We didn't see him at first due to the overgrown bushes. I could hear him talking when he just turned around and came back running to me. Before I could get a word out, he said, "He is just sitting there not saying anything." I rolled my eyes and told him he needed to speak up because a lot of old people are hard of hearing. So I went up there with my friend. Cocky, I told him this is how a pro does it. Sure enough, there sat an older man on a chair. He was wearing a white pair of overalls with red pinstripes and wore a pair of brown dress shoes. He was bald and had deep lines in his forehead. His face wore a withered, sad look that bared the wrinkles of time. He had one leg crossed over the other and both hands interlaced on his crossed knee. His hands were covered with age spots, and his fingernails were in desperate need of a trim. His eyes were sunken deep in their sockets and hollowed out and appeared to be staring off into the distance. "Hello?" I said. No answer. "Hello?" Even louder. "Me and my friend want to mow your yard. $15. Still, no answer or even any sort of acknowledgement from the old man. I looked at my friend, and he gave me that let's go nod. I told the old man bye, and without warning, he stood up, looked at my friend, and gazed at me. This time I saw that his eyes were glazed over milky white. Without a word he went into the house and shut the door behind him. My friend asked, "What do we do now?" I replied, "We wait to see if he comes out with some money." As we waited, my friend mentioned his eyes. I agreed they looked spooky but assured him it was normal for old people to get them, or at least I told myself that during that time. We then started talking about how to divide the 15 evenly, and maybe we should have asked for more when all of a sudden we hear a loud POW. A gunshot type of pow. We both jumped up and ran like two hungry dogs being called to dinner. In our haste we left the mower and tank of gas and oil behind. As soon as we got around the corner, we talked about how we should go about getting the mower without getting shot. We decided to call the cops, so we knocked on a nearby neighbor's door. The lady that called for us mentioned she had not seen the old man in a long time either. She too thought maybe the house was abandoned. It wasn't, but a few minutes later, and about half a dozen cops showed up. We told them what happened and how he just walked back inside with no word. They asked us the typical questions: did anyone witness what happened, what was he wearing, etc. They assured us it was probably not a big deal, and he was probably just trying to scare us off, but they'd go talk to him and let us get our things. The cops did agree, though, that the house looked abandoned. The air turned, however, from them investigating an old man shooting at us into a welfare check. Several cops ended up going inside while we watched from the street. They weren't inside very long until they came out shaking their heads. "You boys say this happened today?" asked one of the perplexed officers. "Yes, sir." We both said back. The cops kept asking us if we entered the house, and we told them no. It felt like we were on trial. They wouldn't tell us what was going on. A few moments later an unmarked car pulled up, and a plainclothes cop walked up to the house and went inside. After a few minutes he came outside and headed towards us. He introduced himself as a detective and also asked us what happened, and once again we gave him our statement. He asked us too what he was wearing. And then asked us if we went into the house. Again we both said no, and he said, "I am not going to arrest you if you did, but I need to know if you did." We asked what the deal was. He said, "What you are telling me and what is inside don't match. There is a deceased individual wearing the clothes you described, but it appears he has been dead for some time, for months, maybe longer." My friend and I were both dumbfounded. Did the guy go in and just end himself? We didn't know what to think. The cops finally let us get our things and leave. That night the local news called us wanting an interview, but we didn't want to be on TV. However, when the story did air a few days later, we learned that yes, an old man was dead, but from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot to the head, and we also discovered a dead dog that was his. They said the dog had eaten parts of the man, and he had been dead for around 6 months and was partially skeletonized. Needless to say, that ended my mowing career as a kid. After being yelled at by crazy old women, invited in by weird old men, and having a paranormal encounter with a ghost we both thought was a real corporeal person, I had enough. Okay, so I'm at work right now, and something unexplainable just happened. I work with a private client who needs 24/7 care. He is bedridden and doesn't talk or make much sound. I basically stay in a room with him at night and take notes while he is sleeping. I'm here to note if he does any teeth grinding or tossing around a lot. It's just him and his mother living here. We're out in the middle of nowhere in Tyrone, North Carolina. I've been working at this house for a few months now. Nothing odd had happened until about 20 minutes ago. Most nights I leave his door open just out of habit, but tonight I decided to close it so the heat would stay in here. I'm just sitting here practicing Duolingo when all of a sudden I heard what sounded like a woman moaning in pain loudly and for a long time. It startled me. Made the hairs on my body rise. I was working up the courage to open the door when I heard a knock on the door, so I said, "Come in." It's the client's mother asking me if he was laughing. I just look at her puzzled. I don't understand how she heard laughter, but I heard something terrifying. We checked the whole house, and there is nothing that can be confirmed for why this happened. She's just as confused as I am. She's handling it better too. I'm low-key very much frightened. I can't help but feel uneasy now. I still have 5 hours left to go. My brain just can't comprehend how this happened. Working in an old nursing home slaughter farmhouse. Here's a brief backstory. I worked in a very old nursing home that used to be a farmhouse/slaughterhouse in the 1800s from the age of 20 to 25. I'm now 27. And it's in the middle of nowhere. I worked night shifts with my best friend and flatmate. One night, only my friend and I, healthcare assistants, and one nurse were on duty. It's a 38-bed home at full capacity. There's an old side and a new side. The old side has been there since the 1800s, and the new side has been there since 2008. The nurse is doing a sleep-in shift, so she is asleep on the new side of the building. At 2:45, we start our rounds to check on the residents. My friend and I never leave each other's side. We are both terrified of the old side of the building. It just has a dark energy and heaviness, like someone sitting on your back. We start on the ground floor, working our way from the bottom end of the corridor to the top. At the top of the hallway by the elevator, we leave empty cups before ascending the rear stairs. 6 cups. We make our way up the stairs starting from room 11A round to 18. Room 11A is basically room 13, but the owner refused to have the 13th room. We leave room 15 until last, as we could go down the back stairs into the kitchen next to that room. We enter the room to check on a resident, offer fluids, and fill out paperwork. I'm standing by the bedside, my friend sat in the chair. Time check. 3:33. We both look at each other and make a silly ghostly sound. I will never mock again. I feel cold breath in my ear and a dark growl. I freeze, my friend turning pale as she sees the room get very dark around me. We both calmly exit the room. We take the back stairs down into the kitchen and right out the kitchen door into the smoking area to process what the hell just happened. Neither of us knew what to say. We had heard noises and stories from others but laughed it off. We go back in to collect the cups by the lift, and I shout for my friend to come see what I'm seeing. We left 6 cups. There was now 4. She opens the kitchen door to me, and 1 cup lifts up and is thrown down the corridor to meet the other. 2. I must tell you now, no residents on that floor were mobile, and only staff can access it through the doors. We are the only staff there, the nurse is still asleep on the other side of the bullring. We walk down the corridor, collect the cups, and go back into the kitchen, put the cups in the sink, and there's a flickering shadow like a moth round a light bulb. There is no moth in sight, no windows open. We haven't told many people of this story, as I know it sounds absolutely crazy. I never slept for a while and kept waking up having strange dreams and feeling dark energies around me. My boyfriend woke me up one night, shaking me and shouting at me, saying there was a tall woman with a hood hanging over me. He doesn't believe in anything like this and is very closed-minded when it comes to these things. He was nearly crying with fear. Another dream I had was a sort of astral projection. I could see myself asleep and also see myself sitting on the floor at the bottom of my bed with my head and my hands crying. I suddenly am back in my body, being dragged out of bed by myself, reaching for my phone under my pillow to call my friend in her room, and I wake up. I awaken with my phone in my hand, dialing her contact number. I put on all the lights and go into her room to sleep with her. I am terrified of having another dream like that, and I now hate sleeping alone. My friend and I were always interested in the paranormal, watching TV shows, attempting to debunk phenomena, and trying to make contact with something. My friend has been using Ouija boards for some time, and I am uncertain whether I want to engage with it. I want to know what I felt or who was responsible for it. What I still feel sometimes is the reason I walk a little faster down corridors. Since leaving the nursing home, I have become very spiritual with myself, not as in God, but with protection, putting salt at my front door, burning sage, anything to keep that sort of negativity out. Hope you enjoyed my experiences. I definitely didn't, but it feels a little better to tell you here, to people that understand. If anyone has any advice or questions, I'd love to know. I work as an armed nuclear security officer in Texas. This didn't happen to me, but I was present when it happened. About 3 years ago, during our nighttime shooting qualifications, one of our management members had ended themselves at his home just 2 weeks after learning that his cancer had returned. Unlike other management members, the individual who had ended himself was greatly admired by most of the security force. He was a good friend and mentor to us all, always happy to lend us support in our training material. It devastated us to hear how he passed, but we all understood his reasons for doing so. At roughly about 10 p.m., one of our security force members came pulling into the parking lot of our shooting range. He was working late because we were scheduled for a battle drill the next weekend, and he was the one responsible for designing the adversary operations. All the people in my training group were surprised to see him. We all asked him what had brought him from the main office building out to the range at such a late hour. He straight up told us, still even in disbelief, that there was something going on in the training office, and he wasn't staying there by himself. According to what he told us, he was in a cubicle working on the drill plans when he heard the office chair in our deceased manager's room roll across the floor. The workspace was only a little ways behind him and hadn't been touched since our supervisor had died. The officer looked into the room, but of course, there wasn't anyone there, and the chair had been rolled to a corner. My coworker, not really thinking much of it and convincing himself that someone might have moved the chair during the daytime, went back to his cubicle and kept working. It wasn't long before he started hearing what he said sounded like footsteps walking around the entire office area. Again, He convinced himself that maybe it was a janitor or someone and called out, "Hello?" No answer, so he stood up and looked over his cubicle to see if there was anyone present. After sitting back down, he said that he started feeling a bit more uncomfortable, like he knew that someone was in the room with him but couldn't see anyone. Nervously, he just went back to work. The first voice he suddenly heard sounded like it was from the front of the room. He couldn't accurately tell if it was coming from the hallway or in the office space itself, so he just shrugged it off initially. But a few moments later, he distinctly heard a male's voice say something towards him from just a few feet behind him. After that, he closed his laptop and grabbed his stuff. He came out to the shooting range and completed his paperwork there with us. As far as I know, that was the only time something spooky happened in that office area. My first ghost experience was terrifying. This story happened about 11 years ago. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had been at the job I'm at now for about 2 years. My boss had asked me to house sit and watch his dog for him while he went out of town for 3 days. I was excited to go to his nice house, which was a big upgrade from my parents' house, to hang out with the dog and drink a few beers. The first night started out as expected, a few beers, a movie, and chilling with the dog. So now it's time for bed. The guest room where I was to stay was the last of 3 in the hallway next to the garage. As the dog and I lie down to unwind and get into bed, I start looking at my phone, and when I feel tired, I put it down and turn off the light. This is when things start to happen. The room door was open. I remember this detail, as it has relevance the next night. After a few minutes of lying there trying to sleep, I hear a thud in the hallway. It sounded almost like someone or something was hitting the wall as they walked by, but I didn't hear any footsteps. I couldn't tell whether it was from the garage or the other side of the door headed towards the rest of the house, so I brushed it off as maybe the house settling. Back to sleep. 4 to 5 minutes pass, and I hear the same noise again. I thought there might be an animal in the garage, like a cat or raccoon, so I got up to check but found nothing. I probably shouldn't have done that because it eliminated one possibility of what could be causing the noise. It keeps happening, and I just try my hardest to ignore it. Just heavy thuds against the same spot on the wall in the hall. The noise occurs continuously throughout the night, every few minutes. I somehow fall asleep and go about my day at work, forgetting as the day goes on. Night 2 arrives, and I remember as soon as I get in the car and head over there. I pick up where I left off, a few beers and a movie, the usual. Time for bed, and this time I shut the door. This would be my biggest mistake. So I'm lying in bed, the dog is next to me, and the door is shut. I'm lying there, and like any rational-minded person, I'm thinking of reasons to explain to myself what caused the phantom thuds the night before. I soon realize that it's totally quiet. Great. It was nothing. About 15 minutes after I lay down, just as I began to feel relief from the realization that it was nothing, someone aggressively tickled my entire body. I say tickle because of the way the hands were on me, except this wasn't a tickle fight. This was a get the hell out of this room or you shouldn't have shut the door tickle. I jumped up faster than I thought possible, turned the light on, and it was over. Grabbed the dog, threw on my clothes, and drove out of there as fast as possible. I wasn't even sure if I locked the door, but I did not care. There was no way I was stepping back in that house. I still have no idea what was in that room with me, but I do know that whatever it was did not like me and was upset when I shut that door. The message it sent was well received. I haven't been back to that house since, and I didn't stay for the 3rd night. I still work for the same guy, and as far as I know, he has never experienced any paranormal activity in the house. I work in an assisted living facility in a small town, which is a strange place to be. I don't even know how to start because this still creeps me out when I work second shift here. So anyways, I work as a CNA, certified nursing assistant, at an assisted living facility near my house. After about 3 months of working day shift there, I picked up some extra hours and offered to work some 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shifts. As I'm walking around the halls of sleeping residents, I'm 100% sure everyone is sleeping and or resting. I sit down at the nurse's station, and the lights are off down this one hallway. I hear this sound that sounds like a door opening as if a resident is about to walk out. I look, and no one comes out, but I can see the door to the room being opened. I wait and just watch a few moments more, and no one comes out. So I call out, "Hey, do you need some help?" And sure enough someone said something, but I can't make out what it was they said. I get up to start walking towards that room, and the door shuts super hard. I turn around, and the door opens again, then shuts hard again. After I collect my thoughts, I start running and walking down to the room, and the door is shut at this point. I go to open this door, and it's locked. So I get a key to open it. No one is in this room. The lights are off. It's an empty, vacant room. So I just kind of ignore it. About an hour later I hear the door open again, and this time I hear a walker/rollator start to zoom down the hall, but there is not one to be seen. I go down to the room, open the door, and turn the lights on, and nothing is there. I even prop the door open to keep it from opening and shutting. My coworker I had that night then proceeds to tell me that a lady passed away in that room over a year ago and that they have similar experiences all the time, and that it's the resident that passed away. She even had photos of an orb on her phone of a so-called ghost. She showed me that room. Super creepy. I never work at night anymore. I went to a very haunted college that used to be a mental institution for many years. I was an actor, and we were filming something in the tunnels that run below the college, and we had to have security with us, so I asked them about their experiences with ghosts. They shared some stories that I anticipated, such as walking through the tunnels at night and hearing footsteps behind them, only to find no one there, as well as elevators opening by themselves to empty floors. But they had one story that I absolutely loved. It was pretty late one night, and two guards, A and B, were in the security booth watching the monitors. Since it was after hours, most of the buildings were locked for the night. We called them cottages, but they were massive 3-story brick buildings. One of the guards sees on the camera a woman appear in one of the upper floors of cottage C. He gets worried that they might have accidentally locked one of the cleaning staff inside without realizing it, so the guards decide one will go let her out, and the other will stay in the security office. Building C wasn't too far from their office, so the guard, A, who stayed behind shortly after saw his coworker, B, on camera go into the building. Guard B goes upstairs to find the cleaning person but radios back to the office that there's no one in the building. The guard, A, watching the camera says, "No, I see her in the window on the top floor, she's pacing back and forth." Guard B appears on the camera in those same windows and reports, "There's no one here." Guard A, the one who was telling me this story, said he was so scared he radioed to Guard B to get the hell out of the building right away. He had some other neat stories about being in the guard booth and on camera seeing a woman in really raggedy clothing coming up to the booth window where they could talk to students outside, and he'd go to open the window only to see no one there. He would glance at the cameras, and the woman would be positioned directly in front of him outdoors. He stopped working nights there because he said it was getting too creepy with all the experiences he was having. It's a pretty spooky place. My mother used to work at a self-storage facility that had noises and voices. My mother, maybe almost 15 years ago, worked at a self-storage facility. She was the cashier and also helped customers get to their storage units at times. Only one other person worked there at times. Sometimes I would visit her there. We would sit at the front desk and talk. One thing that my mom and I both noticed was, at times, it sounded like people would walk up to and into the front entrance, but when we looked up, nothing happened. I recall getting up out of the chair, looking out the window, and no one was around. These noises happen quite a lot. One time, not very loudly or anything, I heard my name called. This also occurred when my mom and I were sitting there talking at the front desk. I turned my head, looking in the direction of the voice, but no one was there besides my mom and me. I sort of thought it might have been someone walking down the street, but the facility has no buildings around it, and I've never in my life seen someone walking down its street. It sounded more like it came from the back room, which is just the next room over. Another time, when my mother was working there alone, she heard her coworker upstairs call her name. But the coworker had left the building at lunchtime, so she was the only person there. Years later, looking up haunted places online, I learned the eastern side of a road in my city has had ghost sightings on the street. That road, which is where the self-storage facility is located, is also on the eastern side. I went to a house fire on Christmas night only to find a man hanging in the driveway. We then spent hours putting it out with him watching from the tree. During cleanup an unseen music box played "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" on a loop until the house was demolished the next day. So the story goes like this. Many years ago I was a volunteer firefighter in a rural area. I dutifully stayed the night when I could, even on this particular Christmas night. At 11:30 p.m. or so we are awakened for a brush fire. Someone sees a big fire through the woods. It was cold and a little weird already, so the officer decides we're taking the pumper instead of the brush truck. We hop in and go. Once atop the ridge, we see a huge fire in the valley below, and the officer says, "That's too big for brush, that's a house. Better park up." We make it to the road, and as we turn onto the long, tree-lined drive, the scene unfolds. Someone asks, maybe me, maybe no one did and it was in my head, why is that guy standing on a ladder watching a house burn? Oh. The captain moved the ladder in an attempt to squeeze the truck around, but alas, there was not enough room for a truck half our size. So instead, The truck remained parked just a few feet away from his quietly still form. We hand-jacked the two with a pair of pre-connects from the back and set up shop at the front, pissing into what felt like the gates of hell. Throughout this time, we kept glancing over our shoulders at the man who was silently watching us from his elevated position, illuminated by the light from the pumper behind him. Hours pass, and he watches until the coroner cuts him down without warning as I glance back. He landed with a thud I think I could feel through the earth. We had used copious amounts of our newfangled calf's foam, blanketing the whole area like waist-deep snow. A hooligan bar lay hidden somewhere. We shuffle our feet around searching. I search the area around the only corner of the house that remains, like a monument to our impotence. A back door and adjoining vestibule used for storage packed to the ceiling. From somewhere in the heap I hear a music box playing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" on a loop. I ask someone else if they hear it too, and they ask if I'm alright, maybe I need to go take a break. But no, eventually they come closer and corroborate my madness. By the time we leave, dawn has broken. A letter had been found on the man who bid his estranged children to sift through the ashes for their presents. It apparently also mentioned that he had been consuming the ashes of his late wife with meals. Our assistant chief returned in the afternoon of Boxing Day in one last attempt to find the tool, and the family was already demolishing the property. Unknowingly, the family cut down the tree from which he was watching, allowing the bulldozer to push what remained into the foundation. Our assistant chief was present when the bulldozer pushed the remaining debris into the foundation, and he noted that the tune still played, "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." My dad's former workplace was super haunted. So, my dad used to work at this restaurant that was extremely haunted. The building was very old, built sometime in the mid-1800s, and there were records of at least a few deaths happening on the premises back when it used to be a boarding house. Staff used to complain about cold spots and weird smells, and sometimes something would push by them when there was no one around. But there are two first-hand accounts directly from my family. The first story is my mother's. Well, technically I was there too, but I don't remember it. I was only 2 at the time. It was my dad's turn to open up the restaurant that day, and she had gone with my father to spend some extra time with him while he did prep work. She went to the bathroom and took me with her. As she was washing her hands, she heard 3 knocks on the bathroom door. Knock. 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 Evenly spaced. She thought that my dad was playing a joke on her. So, she whispered to me, "Your father has no rhythm," and knocked back a fun pattern. A raw tap tap. 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 She expected my dad to crack a joke or knock back in a playful way. But, instead, came the same 3, evenly spaced knocks. After she left the washroom, she saw my dad coming down from the 2nd floor of the restaurant. "Very funny, honey," she said. My dad was very confused. He had no idea what she was talking about. To this day, he says that he didn't knock on the bathroom door. The restaurant was locked. You don't want customers wandering in before you're open, after all. My parents and I were the only people there. That's the first story. The second is mine, but before I tell it, I'd like to go on a brief tangent and describe the restaurant a little bit better and give you a better feel for the overall vibe. In general, the interior was always pretty dark. The only windows in the place were at the front of the building facing the street, and that natural light didn't do much because the building was very long. The back of the restaurant, near the kitchens, was the darkest place in the whole building. But, it always felt the coziest to me. No, the worst area was, paradoxically, the brightest. There was a patio attached to the 2nd floor, with an adjoining sunroom. The worst room in the whole building. The rest of the restaurant was very cramped and very dim, good old Victorian architectural design. The sunroom, in contrast, was very open and very light, and it had a lovely view of the patio and the pretty flower boxes we had out there. And I hated it. Standing in that big, empty room, you could feel all of the space behind you, and you always had the unsettling thought that something was watching you. I used to hug the walls whenever I was in there, because that way nothing could stand behind me. I mention this because my story happens on the 2nd floor. There was going to be a fundraising event on the 2nd floor, and I got recruited to help out. My mom had me running around, putting up decorations, cleaning, the works. Normally I was scared to be on the 2nd floor at all, but it wasn't so bad because I was with other people and had a job to distract myself with. It was actually the first time that I had ever had fun being up there. That didn't last long, though. The first strange thing that happened was that a painting went flying off the wall. And I do mean flying, it didn't just fall, it went a good few feet horizontally. Of course, this was spooky, but we all just rationalized it, put the painting back on the wall, and kept working, because people were going to start arriving in a few hours. Once the event got started, that was when the real trouble began. One of our friends, Sally, went into the second floor bathroom. When she tried to leave, the door wouldn't open, even though it wasn't locked. At this point, she got a bit nervous and knocked on the door, hoping that someone on the other side could help her get it open. And that set something off, because suddenly the entire bathroom erupted into loud banging. It was a commotion. People outside heard, including me, and we all gathered around the bathroom door to try and get her out of there. We instructed her to lock the door and then unlock it again. We jiggled the doorknob. We even tried forcing it open. Nothing worked. Inside, what was muffled banging to us sounded deafeningly loud to Sally. It really freaked her out. We were only able to get the door open once the mysterious noise had stopped. Weirdly, we'd never had any issue with the door sticking before, and I don't think we had one after. Sally put on a brave face, but it was clear that she was pretty rattled. In private, she later confided that it was one of the most frightening things that had ever happened to her. Later on, after all the guests had left, I was helping clean up. We had a small stand of necklaces for sale set up on the minibar. A pendant in the middle started swaying forwards and backwards, like someone had flicked it with their finger. The rest of the necklaces were perfectly still. My mom saw this too. We both looked at each other and quietly decided that it would be best to not make a fuss and get out of there as quickly as possible. I think that night set a record for the most unexplained events that had happened in the restaurant at once. It closed down a few years later and was mostly torn down and rebuilt. I don't know whether the new building is still haunted or not. My mom used to work in a haunted Irish pub. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the area in Brampton, Ontario, but my mom used to work in the Dominion building, built in 1888, which was once an Irish pub and is now a Starbucks. The encounters had started when she started working there. When the pub was busy and full of people, she would see people in very old uniforms, I believe she said very vintage postman and policeman outfits, and no one would ever talk to them. They would walk from the entrance end and seem to vanish into the bathroom area. One night my mom, still new to the job, was closing the pub, and she was scared she'd see one of what she had established to be ghosts walk by her, and before she knew it, a man in a very vintage outfit walked from the back of the pub to the front door. My mom, scared shitless, just kept doing what she was doing and kept her head down and said all she had really seen was a pair of very vintage boots walk by, again to the front door, and then when she looked up there was none there. She freaked out and called the owner to come down to the building, and apparently he came into the pub laughing at her because he knew exactly what had just happened. There was also another experience she had in the pub with a pair of friends she had gotten to know well that would come for drinks every night. It was near closing time, after my mom had worked there for a while, and she was starting to tell the friends who were the last ones in the building that it's time to head out and if they had seen anyone else. One of the friends told my mom that he had seen a guy walk straight to the bathroom, so there's one last person left. My mom, who knew what was happening, said, "No, you didn't," probably holding back laughter, as the building owner was at this point, and he then proceeded to tell her that she was wrong and saw a man walk right in there. My mom told him to take a look in the bathroom, and she told me he came back out with a pale white face. My mom, I'm assuming she saw the humor in the situation, said, "You know what you just saw, right? I work in a pharmacy that's located inside a nursing home, and I've been working there for the past 4 years. Just a note to mention, I've had many prior paranormal experiences in my life, but this is still ongoing. I've always felt a presence since the first week I started, but it was never anything that made me feel threatened. Things didn't really start happening until last year when I started talking to my coworkers about feeling a presence and asking if that was something that they've experienced as well. The day after I had a conversation with my coworker, I was working a night shift. On our night shifts, it's only one technician and a pharmacist. I was sitting at the back counter at my computer when I thought I saw someone come through the door. We're usually not busy at night, but there's the odd time that one of the nurses will come down for a bag of chips or a pop. I got up from where I was seated and walked over to where our cash register was, and from there you can see the pop coolers and the chip racks. I didn't see anyone, so I left and walked back and forth looking down the aisles. Nobody was there. I asked my coworker if he had seen anyone come in, and he said no, but I was 99.9% sure someone had walked through that door. I didn't think much of it. It was late, and I decided I was probably just overtired. I sat back down in my chair and started filing prescriptions. About 25 minutes later I looked up and saw a pack of toilet paper slowly moving forward to the edge of the shelf before it dropped on the ground, startling me. There's absolutely no way it could have just been our air system or a draft that knocked it off. My coworker saw this and thought it was odd too. I told him it was a spirit that moved it, and he looked at me like I had 5 heads. So, to prove my point, I brought up the security camera footage. On the video you can see two bright and fairly large orbs moving around as the toilet paper was being moved. I showed it to him, and there was no denying that it was a spirit trying to make itself known. That was my first significant paranormal experience at the pharmacy. We have had things go missing only to find them in the strangest places. For example, my car keys went missing one day from my locker, only for me to find them in with the prescription vials. My coworkers all swore up and down that nobody hid them there, and I most definitely didn't. Things are always falling off the shelves, and sometimes they're heavy items. Not just something light like the toilet paper incident. We had a 5 kilograms jug of Epsom salts crash on the ground and break open, and nobody was remotely close to the aisle. Many of my coworkers and I see what looks like someone walking by out of the corner of our eye only to realize no customers are in the store. We also hear what sounds like the door to the front entrance opening and closing, and nobody enters the store. This happens multiple times a day sometimes. The only time I've ever felt threatened or scared so far was when I was working the night shift and got locked in the bathroom. It very well could have been a hardware malfunction, but I don't believe it was. The handle was locked from the inside, and I don't normally lock it anyways. I did my business, flushed the toilet, and washed my hands. I went to walk out the seemingly unlocked door, and it felt like it was being held shut from the other side. I figured it was just my coworker messing with me, so I started yelling his name, saying that it wasn't funny and to let me out. The handle started moving as if someone was on the other side wiggling it. I yelled again for my coworker, and he must have finally heard me because I could hear his footsteps. He asked what was wrong and then pulled open the door with ease. He's now finally starting to believe that I wasn't crazy and this place actually had some paranormal activity going on. My office is haunted. Several people have told me they have seen a spirit in our office. I have never seen anything paranormal, so I figured I would never see it anyway. Then I realized I might have been hearing it this whole time. Late at night I hear whispers or people talking when nobody's there. And a few days ago somebody called my cell phone from the switchboard at like 9:30 p.m. They hung up before I got there, but I called right back thinking it might be an emergency. I got the switchboard, of course, and the answering service. Then I thought, wait a second, if there was an emergency, they would have called me on their cell phone, not the switchboard. So the next day I had the receptionist check. Someone had indeed called me from the switchboard. I asked her to check the camera feed to see who. There was nobody there. The last person left the office at 7:10, and the janitor had already come and gone. So I'm getting spirit phone calls, apparently. Spooky things at work. I, female, 23, have been at my job for over a year, close to 2. When I first started, everything felt genuinely safe, and I never felt anything weird, as in ghostly or anything of the sort. I worked the graveyard shift, as some call it, 9 to 5 nighttime hours, for context. The first time my coworker and I got spooked, we were alone in the building and clearly heard a door slam. Now, this isn't any normal door, it's a big, heavy metal door. We thought that an officer might have entered the area, and since our cameras weren't working, we ran to the window to see if anyone came out of the hallway, but no one did. We shrugged it off, but that night we both stayed together in the same room until officers came back into the building closer to shift change. Some months later I needed to go retrieve some items from the evidence room, and I think that's when things really started to amp up. I walked in, and the room had 2 dim lights in it. They lit up enough to see where you were in the room, but it definitely wasn't full light. Being the curious person I am, I started to look around. As someone who was relatively new, I had never really examined evidence before, but my curiosity got the best of me. The wall featured a large glass display that showcased crime scene photos, and it contained enough items of interest that I pulled out my phone, turned on my light, and began shining it into the case to view the remaining photos. I was amazed. But knowing I needed to get back to work, I walked out with the items. But when I went back to return the items, I felt what you would describe as fear or just genuinely felt anxious about going back in there for some reason. It was just a weird, spooky feeling. In the following months, I occasionally heard voices coming from offices that I knew were unoccupied, and I would catch a glimpse of a dark figure or what I believed to be a coworker in the middle of the hallway. However, when I looked closely, there was no one there. It happened multiple times in the year and a half I had been here. Until one night it really picked up. My shift had just commenced, and I had taken a seat to settle in when a coworker exclaimed, "Who the F is that?" And another stated, "Close the door." I was like, "What?" And they told me, "We just saw someone with long hair go in there." And I was like, "Well, go check?" He was the officer, after all, who was armed. He said, "Well, if she needs help, she can call us over the radio." Since there was another person in that room, they had clearly seen this person or thing walk in. It was left at that, and everyone eventually dispersed from the area we were in. As the previous shift left, it was only me and a few other coworkers left in the building that would eventually need to leave the building for whatever calls and whatnot. Well, at around 3 a.m. I decided to switch the lights off as my head was starting to hurt a little, and I sat back down, and that's when I heard what I know to be the main door entrance. My eyes darted to the screen that shows all of our cameras, and I didn't see anyone in the lobby or going into our restroom, but I thought, surely if they did go into the restroom, I'd hear the toilet flush, or I'd see them. I waited, and no one came out. I thought maybe I was spooking myself out, but then I heard a door slam in the area behind mine. Again, it's heavy, large metal doors that need to be slammed to be closed. And they don't just open or close with the draft from the AC. My coworker who would usually be in that area had gone home an hour earlier, and all officers were on the streets on a call. I tried to brush it off by just looking at my phone and computer screens, but I couldn't shake the feeling of someone or something staring at me. I finally got the courage to stand up and turn the lights on, and I found 2 cabinets in our kitchen area that were wide open. I immediately came and sat down. I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to take my mind off of spooking myself, but nothing was working. I began monitoring again, and then I felt it, like the hair behind my ear was being pulled lightly. I could feel and sense someone sitting in the chair behind mine staring at me, and I could hear a very specific crunch sound the wall made when someone sat in that chair and twisted in it. It was like a very, very slow turn. Eventually, I realized that my shift was nearly complete, and I gathered enough courage to enter the kitchen and close the cabinets. When I approached, the cabinets were already closed. I had 20 minutes left of my shift, and in those 20 minutes I had an officer stand with me in the doorway the whole time. I took the next week off, and I didn't hear or see anything after. The ghost may have been telling me to take a vacation, or it was just work stress. Either way, I still tell my coworkers this place is haunted, and occasionally I'll still get the feeling of being watched in different areas of the building. This isn't the most exciting ghost story, but I'm sharing it here as it fits. I was offered a premise for a small business. The rent was cheap because the upstairs area was run down and needed to be renovated. It was an old bank building, built between World War I and II. The upstairs was originally a small but, for its time, nice apartment for the bank manager's family. Downstairs was a day spa, so I had to do the noisy renovating after hours. This meant going there after my day job and working from 7 p.m. until midnight. I was so keen to get the work done that I didn't even register the creepiness of the place. I sourced old timber and copied the intricate skirting and trim to try to bring it back to its original vintage condition, etc. The hall outside would squeak when someone walked past. It was a recognizable sound. As I said, I was so focused on the work I didn't notice much, but late one night I heard the squeak and thought it was strange. Then it dawned on me what time it was and that I'd heard the squeak a few times before. I went into the hall but couldn't see anyone. My thoughts immediately went to flesh and blood threats. I grabbed a hammer, went downstairs, did a quick walkthrough, and checked the doors and windows were locked. It was fine, and most of the downstairs was alarmed. I came back upstairs to finish what I was working on. A while later the hall floor squeaked again, so I quickly checked it. This time there was a nondescript click/clank noise in the old bathroom at the end of the hall. Stupidly, I just walked up to have a look at who was there. It was a big old bathroom with a pale green porcelain bath and sink. There was no one there and no way in or out. I wasn't really spooked, but it was time to leave anyway, so I quickly tidied up and left. The noises continued randomly, and I just got my renovations done. There were also flickering lights a couple of times, and, in hindsight, tools moved around as if hidden in silly places. After I finished the renovations, the place looked really good, and I invited some of the staff from downstairs to come up and have a look. They were all hairdressers, massage therapists, beauticians, etc., all female. A couple of them said they hadn't been upstairs in years. One commented that the energy doesn't feel so bad up here now. It was all a bit strange. Later in the week I was downstairs and asked one of the staff about the comments. She told me about all the phenomena that had occurred after hours when the hairdresser studio was upstairs. The staff reported experiences such as people being touched by invisible hands, trolleys suddenly moving by themselves, and voices coming from the corners of rooms. None of the staff liked being up there. Sorry if this was a long read with not much juicy ghost action. I guess I'm writing it because, at the time, I wasn't really spooked, but in hindsight, I would have been out of there in a blink during those late nights had I known the history. I used that premise for 3 years. Other people mentioned feeling creeped out in parts of the building. A mate of mine said he swears he saw something in the hallway. In the last few months of being there, the downstairs day spa moved out, and I was in the whole building by myself. Although I never saw anything, there were a few times when I had a feeling that something was off, which led me to decide it was time to leave for the night. A postscript to this story is a chance encounter with a person who claims to have psychic ability. She described that very same place to me in great detail, right down to details only I would know due to the renovations I did there. She told me that the place was very active with spirits. She detailed 2 spirits who were there while I did my work. The female was very interested in me, followed me around, and tried to get my attention by playing little tricks. The male wasn't as interested but would check in on me. The other strange occurrence is that, since I left more than 5 years ago, that building has been left vacant, despite it being in a valuable rental location. The place didn't feel right from the start, and the only reason I accepted the offer was the cheap rent. My mom was in a nursing home after suffering a severe stroke. She'd been there for 3 years at this point and was beginning her final process. I came to see her one afternoon, and she looked exhausted. I asked her what was up and why she didn't sleep last night. She told me she couldn't sleep because the bald man from downstairs kept waking her up every time he came to her room. She said he was chatty and liked to tell her about stuff that had happened in his life. She'd remind him that it was dark o'clock, and could he visit during the day when she was awake? But he kept coming back, every 30 to 40 minutes or so. I played 20 questions with her because I was concerned it was an employee and maybe there were some red flags I needed to heed. Or conversations I needed to have with staff. She said he was a patient. His name is Alex. That's weird to me because who lets patients wander willy-nilly throughout the night without stopping them from entering into someone else's room? I went to go get lunch and decided to have a look downstairs and see about gently speaking to Alex about pestering my mom. I found Alex. He was at his end-of-life process too, but much further along than my mom. He hadn't been able to walk for several years. His family was gathered around outside of his room, crying and hand-wringing. The hospital had called to say that he was not long for this world and to come say goodbye. But no one was in his room. They were all in the hall. It's like they were afraid to be near him. So I chatted with a couple of them and asked if they would like me to go in there with them so they could say goodbye. Dying people don't bother me. They said yes, so I went in first, and they followed me. I facilitated conversation and showed them how to say goodbye. It was nice to be able to do that for someone. I asked people to say out loud what Alex meant to them and how and why they loved him. Once they got started, they were on a good roll, with some actual laughter, and were totally cool with me leaving, which I did. I grabbed lunch and took it back to my mom's room to share with her. When I walked in, she said, "Well, that was nice of you to do." Unsure of what she meant, I asked her. She said Alex came to say goodbye and to thank me. He'd seen me many times in my mom's room while walking the hallway. I thought my mom meant that a staff member told her about it. But she insisted it was Alex and not a staff member. She was so adamant about it that she became irrationally angry. So I asked the staff when I left, and they told her I went downstairs and helped that family say goodbye. No one knew what I was talking about. No one knew I was downstairs because they only worked on the floor they were on. That's a cool/weird hospital story that is 109% true. Dying people are open to seeing more than the rest of us. Many other intriguing things happened, but this story sticks out for me. My work is terrifying. I never thought I'd be sharing or talking about anything paranormal. I always kind of wished I'd have paranormal experiences, but now I'm not so sure. This job is draining. I started working in this building over a year ago, but only for special occasions. Recently they asked me to join full-time. I wouldn't say I'm full-time, but I'm there when I can be there. This workspace is huge, 6/7 floors, and we do work on every floor at, mostly, all times. It used to be a nightclub, or a collection of them, actually. It's already a pretty creepy place, the vibes are eerie, and on my first shift I was terrified. It started out with normal things. Certain rooms are significantly warmer or cooler, I thought, it's an old building with a citywide air conditioning system. Whatever. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something is wrong every time I'm there. Over a month ago, I experienced some problems with heart palpitations. I got it resolved, and I'm fine now. I've gone back to the gym, 10K steps a day, no symptoms. Whenever I'm in this building, the palpitations are back. I blamed it on the music, stress, etc., but I ruled out all of those things, and I feel what I can only describe as fresh the second I walk out the door. I asked my coworkers about it, and they said, the eerie feeling never goes away. I decided to do some research on the building. The layout of the building is already very strange. I knew it used to be a mega club, but I still couldn't imagine what it was like before its current state. After looking up the old club name, I found some old photos from the 90s. But what caught my attention more was the number of articles written about deaths in these clubs. So many deaths. There are also articles about near fatalities, which indicate how many people likely died there but were not reported. Needless to say, I'll be taking a few days off. Maybe the whole weekend. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. One late evening working the EMS unit, my part and I responded with the sheriff's department and fire to a report of a man down on the side of the railroad tracks in a wooded area approximately 500 yards from the nearest access road. A railroad employee riding the tracks in a pickup truck outfitted for riding on the rails was doing a safety check of the tracks and noticed the man down the embankment of the tracks. We all had to park our units on a little country road and walk with all the equipment the 500 or so yards to where the patient was. This was in the early 1990s, so there were no cell phones, 800 radios, or GPS on units to track who was talking and their location. When we got to him, he had no signs of life, a flat line on the EKG, along with fixed and dilated pupils. He looked to be 30 to 35 years old. We do a little more checking, and he has no visible signs of any type of trauma/injury. The body is warm, and there is no rigor yet, so he hasn't been dead too long. We don't see track marks anywhere on the body where he would have shot up and overdosed, and we feel no broken bones. We check in his ears, nose, and mouth but find nothing out of the ordinary. There are no marks around his neck where he would have been strangled, and his trachea is intact. The guy with the railroad said a train hadn't passed in the last 8 hours, so that ruled out getting hit by or falling off of it. It is extremely rare for someone of that age to suddenly die, so we began searching the surrounding area in hopes of finding anything unusual. However, all we discovered was a makeshift tent or campsite where the man appeared to have been living, and we did not find any medications or other unusual items. We allowed the railroad employee to leave after he assured us that rail traffic had been halted until our dispatcher called to inform the roundhouse that we were all clear of the tracks. We are not too far from an area where everyone, not just public safety personnel, but also everyone who lives in the area, believes or has heard rumors that the area is haunted. It is where a small old road goes to a single lane, passing underneath an even older railroad trestle. There are drawings and leftovers from apparent satanic worshipping that takes place at night. Even though everyone at the scene, except for one rookie firefighter, was aware of the rumors, none of us had actually seen or experienced anything strange, nor did we know anyone who had first-hand experience with such occurrences. While there was still some daylight when we first arrived, it was now past dusk and about total darkness. We were all walking around just hanging out by the body, waiting for the funeral home to show up and bring the body to the morgue for an autopsy. My partner, 4 firefighters, and 2 sheriff's deputies were present. Then the weird, strange, spooky crap started. A few of us heard what sounded like many people whispering, but it wasn't from any specific direction, and you couldn't make out what was being said. A couple of the guys didn't hear it and thought we were trying to duck with them. Then the whispering noises stopped, and the people on the scene who hadn't heard the whispering started hearing what they all described as children laughing wickedly, but it was all over, not from any specific direction, and we had no doubt they were hearing it because when we shined our lights on 2 of the firefighters, they were as white as a sheet. Those of us that had heard the whispering never heard the new noise. This went on back and forth for about 10 to 15 minutes while we were standing next to the corpse. One of the deputies on the scene told their dispatcher to tell the funeral home to step it up and get out there as soon as they get the chance. When the 2 men from the funeral home arrived, the sound of their gurney on the rail and their conversation effectively drowned out the strange noises. One of the funeral home employees asked why there was a rush to get them out there, and we all looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. With so many people with years of experience out there, no one knew how to answer without sounding like we were chicken shit. The rookie on the fire engine saved us all and said we had to clear the tracks so a train could pass. We helped the funeral home guys load the body, well, more like throw the body on the gurney and get the duck out of there. We didn't even take time to strap him down. Hey, the old boy is dead, we aren't going to make him any deader if he falls off their stretcher. Once we made it back to our units, no one said a word about what had just happened until the guys from the funeral home left. Then we talked among ourselves to determine if we should say anything, but all agreed to keep our mouths shut. We cleared the scene, and my part wanted to talk about what had just happened while heading back to the station. I told him nope, because in my mind I am trying to work out a logical explanation for it. On the way back to the station, I could only think about the implications of the noises. If we heard them, it meant we had a problem. If we didn't hear them, it also meant we had a problem. The next morning both I and my pard went to the morgue to speak with the coroner and find out the cause of death. We had previously conducted this process a few times when the autopsy was complete, particularly in cases where we were uncertain about the actual cause of a patient's death, although such instances were rare. When we went into the coroner's office, the first thing the assistant coroner commented on was that it must have been a very messy and bloody scene. My partner and I looked at him somewhat confused and asked what he meant, explaining that the body was clean when we last saw it. Furthermore, we do not perform body cleaning, and there was no identifiable blood at the scene. He turned somewhat pale and said that just added to the confusion because the body had absolutely no blood in it whatsoever. He said there were no marks anywhere on the body he could find where blood could have been drained out. He also said he was by himself doing the autopsy and had a weird experience but refused to tell us what happened. To this day we have still never learned the actual cause of death or been able to explain the whispering and evil laughing. A couple of side notes. A few shifts later, Engine 17 was dispatched to a medical call in the same general area as the call we handled that evening, and it was the same 4 guys on the engine. While en route, the dispatcher came on and asked them, "Engine 17, would you like us to get Ghostbusters en route to your call?" There was a pause, and the captain responded with a dejected negative because they knew someone talked. But about 5 seconds later he keyed up, and all 4 guys said in unison, "Because Engine 17 isn't afraid of any ghost." Good times and great people to work with. We had many paramedic students come from out of state to ride and do their precept time. Whenever we worked in that area and had a student on board, we would always bring them there at night. We did not even have to tell any stories, just being there was spooky. The fire department that covered this area only had 1 fire engine that could make it under the railroad trestle. That was only after they stopped and let most of the air out of their tires, drove under it, stopped to pull out their air hose to re-inflate their tires, and then continued on. Someone uses my office at night. I live in a big house with my husband, my 2 chihuahuas, and my dad, who's disabled and in a wheelchair, hence, he can't come upstairs. My husband and I sleep in the main bedroom, and the room next to ours is my office. I work from home. Last night, around 11 p.m. my husband woke up to the sound of someone typing on the keyboard, rather aggressively. My dogs heard it too and started growling. The sound of him getting up woke me up, so I heard everything that ensued. By that time my dad was still awake, so my husband came to the office to check what was going on and then walked right up to the stairs to ask my dad if he was typing. My dad replied that he thought we were the ones using the office. He said someone had clearly been mingling here. After a bit of talking, we all heard the typing again, and this time we clearly heard our rolling chair slide across the room. The husband came running back to the office and couldn't see or hear anything. He locked up all the doors upstairs, including ours, and came back to sleep. Needless to say, I couldn't go back to sleep, as I was scared and didn't want to get up to use the bathroom. At around 12 a.m. I very clearly heard the door to the office slam open, and the typing started again. My dogs went crazy running to the door. For some reason I struggled to get my husband to wake up a lot, and when he finally did, he checked, but as soon as he got close to the office, the typing stopped. Also, my dad was asleep by now. He also said the dogs seemed terrified to come into the office with him. Now I wonder if someone borrows my office at night. I'm a nurse in an ICU, sometimes I get hospice patients. However, this one little old lady wasn't on hospice. I was working a night shift, and around 11 p.m. she asked if I could help her get into the reclining chair from her bed. I thought it was a little strange since she had been sleeping peacefully for a few hours prior. I asked her if she wanted a sleeping pill or something, figuring she couldn't go back to sleep, and she responded, "No, I just don't want to die in a hospital bed." I told her that her vital signs looked stable, but she was still persistent. 20 minutes later her heart rate slowed down into asystole until she finally was gone. I'm so glad I was able to get her into the chair. Another time, this loopy patient kept asking me to change the channel. I was getting pretty irritated, so I turned it to this calm, relaxing channel our hospital has. It plays music and shows pretty pictures and videos to help relax the patients. She smiled and said, "Thank you, they like that." I asked who she was talking about. She pointed to the window and said, "Those angels outside my window there. They say they like this channel best." She was gone within the hour. Not paranormal but definitely spooky. My friend and I got dispatched to a house in a nice part of town around 11:30 p.m. one night in reference to a house party with a fight in progress. We get there, and there's absolutely nothing going on. We make contact with an old man we see sitting in the sunroom reading, and he assures us nothing is going on and they haven't had anyone over. His wife is upstairs sleeping, and he's about to turn in as well. We are clear, and I contact dispatch to tell them they must have the wrong address. They confirm that the street and number were right, but it was actually an identical address out in the county, so they send the SO out to the correct location. We are City PD. We work the rest of the uneventful shift and go home at 7. When we come back the next day at 1840, Our sergeant pulls us aside before roll call and nervously asks us what happened when we went to the address with the party the night before. I told the story to him pretty much the same way I told it above. He asked if there seemed to be anything wrong with the man we talked to, and I said no and asked why. He explained that the couple didn't show up for Sunday school, and they're always there. So after church someone went to check on them and found them dying of carbon monoxide poisoning in their bed. No signs of suicide or foul play. According to the evidence found, it appears that they went to the grocery store around 7:30 the night before. They then parked their Prius in the garage but forgot to turn it off. It likely would have been running off battery power, so they wouldn't have heard the motor running yet. The garage door was slightly ajar. So then the battery got low enough, and the car's motor kicked on and idled, filling the house with CO while they were sleeping, until the tank ran dry. The couple was transported to the hospital, but they both passed away. My friend and I were pretty ducked up by the fact that we were talking to this guy while he was being CO poisoned. We both recounted the call with each other to make sure there's nothing we might have missed but couldn't come up with anything we could have noticed or done differently. Then we considered the possibility that he made the 911 call and was experiencing hallucinations or similar phenomena. So we checked with the deputies who went out to the correct location and verified that when they got there, there was a party, and there had been a fight, so the 911 call was purely coincidental. Didn't keep me from wondering if the coincidence was God or the universe sending us to that house in hopes we would see something and save them. Probably the creepiest situation I've ever been a part of. Oh yeah, there was also the guy who hung himself, but while he was hanging there the cord stretched and the knots tightened, so when I rounded the corner it looked like he was standing there looking at me. That was pretty ducked up too. Ghostly warning. My cousin worked as a police officer for an agency that shall go unnamed. Early in his career he was posted in a rather undesirable detail reserved for the new guys located on an island with a historical site on it. This was located in a busy area of the US, so it was necessary to have round-the-clock security. It wasn't a tough gig, per se. The overnight shift was just lonely and isolating. Occasionally other officers on duty would arrive by boat if it was quiet to chit-chat and pass time. He had been warned, in what he thought was just a joke, that the place was haunted and he'd better watch himself. He just laughed it off as older guys busting the new kids' balls. One night my cousin was on duty, alone on the island, sitting in a huge sort of ballroom part of the museum that had a large desk and a TV on it, along with screens showing security cameras, to pass the time. Directly above him was an enormous old chandelier that he would stare at and try to count the number of candelabra bulbs in it. Trust me, it can get boring at night. Every so often he would get up and wander the building and the grounds outside to make sure everything was quiet and in order. This particular night it was stormy and rainy, which was deflating, as it seriously cut down on the odds that another on-duty officer would be swinging by on a boat to say hello, take a meal, or whatever. At some point while watching TV, my cousin thought he heard a door slam on the other side of the building, not entirely unusual, as I said, sometimes other officers would dock up and pop in. He waited a few moments, but no one arrived in the ballroom area. He felt this was odd, and he checked the security camera TV units that were located at the desk along with the regular TV. There didn't appear to be anyone showing on the cameras. One of the cameras showed the main dock area, and there was no boat there either except, of course, for the one he drove out to the island at the start of his shift and would drive back in a few hours in the morning to the turnout point on the mainland at the end of his shift. Yet still he wasn't alarmed, as occasionally a boat would drop another officer off and leave, and perhaps he just didn't notice it on the security camera. He called out again to see if anyone was there. No answer. Then moments later he heard another door slam on the other end of the building. This got him up. He walked from the ballroom area to the main hallway and looked up and down. No one. He called out again, but no answer. Now he was convinced the other guys were messing with him. He walked outside in the rain and briefly scanned the foggy and dark waters around the island to see if a boat was idling there with officers waiting to see him, scared by the joke they were surely playing on him. But again, no sign of anyone. After a few minutes outside, he walked back inside and grabbed his radio from his belt and called over the line for a response from the other on-duty officers. Within seconds, 2 other officers chirped over the wire and asked him what was up. He told them he thought one of them had been on the island because he heard some doors opening and closing. One officer replied that it wasn't him because he was on the mainland eating dinner. Another responded that he was miles away on a boat patrol. At this point my cousin was seriously confused and started to think maybe he'd dozed off and dreamt the sounds of doors opening and closing. He went back inside and headed back to the ballroom area. Upon arriving back at the ballroom, he saw a sight he'll never forget. The enormous chandelier above the desk had broken off its chain and had crashed into a million pieces of glass and twisted brass right onto the desk where he had been sitting just minutes earlier. He would have certainly been seriously injured and perhaps even unalived if he had been sitting in that spot as he had been just a few minutes prior. He radioed that he had an incident at the location, and shortly thereafter the other officers on duty arrived by boat at the island and came inside to survey the damage. They were awestruck. That chandelier had hung there for over 100 years. Both were adamant they had not been to the island all night and had no explanation for the sounds of the doors opening and closing. They certainly had nothing to do with the huge old light fixture suddenly breaking off the ceiling and landing on the desk and floor. But they couldn't deny that they had heard other officers talk about strange occurrences taking place at the island over the years. To this day my cousin has no other explanation but that some sort of entity, a ghost, a spirit, whatever, had gotten him to get up and look around and avoid being killed by a falling chandelier from 15 feet. He worked at the post for another year or so before his seniority got him out of the spot and some poor new rookie got stuck with it. He said nothing strange ever happened again to him, and in over 20 years since that night, he hasn't heard of anyone else having a strange experience like that. Haunted workplace story. I never thought I would end up working at a funeral home. However, I found that job opportunities were limited, and when I came across the listing in the local paper, the money was too good to pass up. They even had an attached residence that I could live in rent-free to ensure I was always on hand since I was their only security guard. Sometimes, the job can be unnerving. Being surrounded by death on a daily basis takes its toll on a person. But I remind myself that I am here to keep the place secure and to ensure that everything runs smoothly. Every night before turning in, I take a walk through the building to ensure that all the doors are locked and the lights are off. If there is a scheduled evening service, I monitor the mourners to ensure they are not causing any trouble or breaking any rules. I get up periodically through the night to make my rounds and ensure all is well. If I hear anything out of the ordinary, I investigate it. At first, I thought that the job here would be a piece of cake. All I had to do was patrol the building at night, keep an eye on the cameras, and ensure that no one tries to break in. Beyond the morbid appeal this place provides for young thrill seekers, there are also chemicals stored here that an enterprising criminal could use in the manufacture of narcotics, so intruders were a concern worth noting. However, as I settled into my new role, I began to realize that the job was more than I had anticipated. The funeral home itself was pretty creepy, with dimly lit hallways and creaky old doors. Every time I walked down one of these dark corridors, I could not help but feel like someone, or something, was watching me. Sometimes, I hear strange noises coming from the other side of the walls. Sometimes, I see a shadow flash past in the corners of my vision. I swear there are moments when I feel a cold breath on the back of my neck. Despite my unease, I try to remain professional. Ultimately, my role is to ensure the safety of this establishment, not to be startled by every minor noise. However, as the nights wear on, I find it harder and harder to shake the feeling that something is not quite right. It wasn't until a few weeks into the job that things began to get strange. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard a noise coming from one of the rooms we used to store the prepped bodies and their caskets for upcoming funerals. It sounded like something was shuffling around in there. I tried to tell myself that there was a reasonable explanation, but I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. As I approached the door to the room, my heart started to race. I wondered if I was just acting paranoid, but the noise was unmistakable. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated for a moment, trying to gather my courage. Finally, I turned the knob and pushed the door open, just a crack, trying to peek inside without making too much noise. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of a casket in the center of the room. I tried to remember if there was a funeral scheduled for the morning, but I couldn't recall seeing the schedule that day. I listened for a moment, but the shuffling noise had stopped. I pushed the door open a little further, and that's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, my hand reaching for the flashlight on my belt, but there was nothing there. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel the sweat starting to form on my forehead. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room, shining my flashlight around. The casket was still in the center of the room, and there didn't seem to be anything else out of place. But I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I finished my patrol of the room quickly and made my way back to my apartment, trying to calm my nerves. It was going to be a long night. The next night, I heard the noise again. My heart sank as I realized that the sound was not just in my head but was coming from the same room as before. Once again, I decided to investigate this issue. I slowly made my way down the hallway, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. As I approached the door, my palms began to sweat and my breath became shallow. My personal experiences have taught me to remain calm under pressure, however, the feeling was a different kind of fear. I pushed the door open slowly and peered inside, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. To my surprise, there was nothing there. No people, no animals, no signs of any disturbance. The room was empty, and the only thing that greeted me was an eerie silence. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what I heard. Was it just my imagination, playing tricks on me? Had I been up too late? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I also couldn't find any logical explanation for the noise. As I made my way back to my room, my mind was racing with thoughts and questions. Was there something in the funeral home that I didn't know about? I did not want to jump to any conclusions, but I knew that I had to keep my guard up and stay alert. As the nights go on, the strange noises persist, and I begin to feel like I am being watched. It's as if someone, or something, is following me through the halls. Every time I turn around, I expect to see a figure looming in the shadows, but there's never anything there. I start to become increasingly paranoid. I double-check the locks on the doors and windows every hour, just to make sure they're secure. I even start carrying a sidearm with me on my rounds, just in case. Things just continue to become even stranger. One night, as I was sitting in my apartment, I heard a series of strange noises coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sounds grew louder and more persistent until they sounded like someone knocking at the door. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was probably just some kids playing a prank. But the knocking continued, growing more insistent by the minute. It was as if someone was desperately trying to get my attention. Feeling a sense of unease, I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. To my surprise, there was no one there. The hallway was completely empty, and there was no sign of anyone lurking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I returned to my apartment, I felt a chill blow past me into the apartment. Once inside, I couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thick and heavy, and there was an unexplained chill that seemed to permeate through every corner of the room. Uncomfortable, I retreated to my bedroom, hoping to get my mind off of the night's events. However, the knocking continued sporadically throughout the night, each time causing my heart to race with fear. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the persistent tapping at the door made it clear that it was not. That's the moment when I realize I can't take it anymore. I need to find out what's causing these noises and put an end to it. The next day, I decide to talk to the funeral home director about my concerns. I half expect him to laugh it off and tell me I'm crazy, but to my surprise, he takes me seriously. He tells me that the funeral home has been rumored to be haunted for years and that some of the staff have reported strange occurrences in the past. As time goes on, my interactions with the spirits are becoming more frequent and intense. I often hear whispers in my ear or feel a cold breath on my neck. Some nights, the spirits become angry and throw objects around the room. I've taken to talking to them as I make my rounds. Talking to them makes me feel more comfortable, and I believe it helps to calm the spirits. I've begun to realize that not all spirits behave the same. Some are friendly and curious, whereas others are vengeful and aggressive. It's as if they each have their stories to tell, and I am the only one who can hear them. Despite my growing attachment to the spirits, I've still had moments of fear and doubt. There are nights when I hear something so terrifying that I just freeze in place, too afraid to move. But then, a warm feeling comes over me, reminding me that I am not alone and that everything is going to be okay. I started to document my experiences in a journal, detailing the encounters I had with the spirits and the strange occurrences that happen each night. I've even started looking into the history of the funeral home in the hopes of finding out more about the spirits' identities and reasons for being there. I haven't had much luck yet, but I'm optimistic. Although my job is unusual, I find a sense of purpose in my interactions with the dead. I know that what I am doing is important and that no one else could do it as well. And who knows, maybe one day I'll even be able to solve the mystery of this place and help the spirits find peace. I found out why nobody in my office wanted to work at night. My father died in 2008 when I had just completed my high schooling, and we were in enormous debt. I still am in poverty, but that story can be told another day. So to continue my studies, I needed to find work, and for 3 years I sold pacodas on the street and taught little children math. In 2012, I was recruited into an ISP in our small town to work the night shift. During the interview, I was particularly asked if I would feel scared to stay alone at night on the third story of the enormous building with one security guard on the ground floor. I was never comfortable, but I needed the job, and being on the night shift, I could attend my college during the day. I worked in that office from February 2012 to August 2013, and during this time, I never got curious enough to ask anyone why no one wanted to work at night. I heard, before me, Someone used to work at night, but he left abruptly. My work was to pick up calls from clients who would have problems with their internet connection and provide simple solutions. Anything complex, and I had to note down their names and addresses and pass the list to my senior via email, and technicians would take care of them during the next day. It was a simple job, and I would not receive many calls, and so by 11, I would spread a thick blanket on the floor and fall asleep with the receivers beside my head in case someone phoned. June 2013 was the month I was supposed to find out why no one was ready to work at night. That night, the security guard, with whom I had developed a very close friendship, came to the third floor and asked me if he could sleep in my room, as there were too many mosquitoes on the ground floor. Understand that he was supposed to stay awake, but he often took advantage of my leniency and slept every night, despite the fact that the entire building lacked security cameras. Anyway, we were both sleeping in the same room. The two receivers were on either side of my head, and the lights were turned off. I had locked the door loosely, keeping the lights of the corridor on. At about 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound as if someone was walking with his feet dragging on the floor. It was an inconvenient sound and very loud. I was facing the door and could see the light on the other side through the thin gap between the floor and the door. I stayed down, staring directly at that gap, trying to understand what or who it was. As I waited, the sound got louder and louder, and soon I saw the feet of someone crossing my door. My heartbeat got faster, and I thought that it must be the security guard, but when I looked behind me, he was fast asleep. My blood froze at this, and the sound started to get louder again, and soon the feet appeared near my door. This time, instead of just crossing my door, it stopped there and didn't move. I waited for whoever it was to move away, but he would not. Then, I did the stupidest thing. I thought it could be an intruder, and instead of waking up the security guard quickly, I tiptoed to the door while the thing still stood there and pulled it open suddenly. There was no one, but a gust of wind hit my face, causing me to get goosebumps all over. I woke up the guard now and explained to him everything. He took out his torch, turned all lights on, and searched the whole building but could find no one. Finally he came to me and said that it could be a demon. I could not sleep again. I dropped messages to those who worked during the day explaining it. I reached the office the next day a little early to catch the others. This was when the story started to emerge. One explained that he did the night shift a few days, and he could always hear someone climbing up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. Another individual reported witnessing an invisible entity move a chair from one corner of the terrace to another. I stayed there for over a year because no one wanted to work nights. I left the company in August after receiving a $3 raise, despite having worked there for more than a year. They used to pay me $54 per month. Yes, the salary is a scarier story than the demon, but I needed to grasp anything I could find to complete my bachelor's degree. I used to attend college in the morning, teach from afternoon to twilight, and then go to the office. The cost of education and staying alive plunged me into further debt from which I am yet to recover completely, but God has been faithful all the time. They have installed cameras in the office these days, and I sometimes wonder if they have been able to capture anything. My personal story from an old police station. So I've been working at a police department in a small Ohio town as a dispatcher. I've been there since March, and all my coworkers say sometimes when you're there by yourself, you'll hear steps or lights will turn on. Now this is an old building. It was a stable/police department when the town was founded in 1869 and turned into a village hall and police department about half a century ago. Now I mostly work afternoon or midnight shifts, and for the most part it's quiet since it's such a small town, 2,000 people. So much of my time is spent sitting in this building alone after dark. Occasionally my officer who works with me will come in and talk for a bit, but I'm usually alone 75% of the time. Some more backstory is that the main entrance to the building is locked from the inside, and the person in the dispatch office needs to open it, unless you have a code or a card to buzz yourself in. Only the dispatchers and the officers have them. I'm there one night by myself, and it's probably going on 10 p.m. I go to the bathroom and do my business, and while I'm washing my hands, I hear a huge slam coming from the main door. So I come running out, hands still wet, and the door is shut. It's only been maybe 5 seconds since I heard the slam, and I assume it's my officer coming in, so I look in their squad room and check our security cameras, and the cruiser is gone, and no other cars are there except mine and the officer's personal vehicle. So I call him, saying what had happened, and ask if he was here, and in the background I can hear talking, and he says he's getting food at a restaurant at the other end of town. So it wasn't him. So there wasn't enough time for anyone to leave, and no one was there. So I get up a few minutes later and walk back to the door, and it's unlocked and cracked open. Again, I've been sitting at my desk, so I would have seen someone come in and open the door. Keep in mind this door was shut when I checked it as I came out of the bathroom. About an hour later I'm still there when the next officer on duty comes on to start getting prepared, and I tell him what had happened. Some background info about this officer: he's pushing 70 and has been at this department for almost 40 years. He tells me, "Oh, that's just Finch, he was an officer who worked here a while back but ended himself about 15 years ago." I had heard no stories like that previous to that night. Since then, anytime anything happens, like footsteps or doors opening downstairs, the PD is in the front of the building up on a hill, and the village hall is downstairs and has a separate entrance at the back of the building. I just kind of brush it off. Another dispatcher, a woman in her late 20s who served in the military as a military police officer until about 4 years ago when she moved to Ohio and started working here, had since told me about some of her experiences, and they're all pretty similar. Footsteps, a door opening that shouldn't open, but she did say she heard someone talking from downstairs while working at midnight. A few other officers and dispatchers have said they've heard things, but nothing like my or her experiences. Haunting at work. This place had 2 floors and a basement in use. It was a bakery, and I often worked in the second floor and main floor kitchens alone. As the only evening baker at the bakery, I often found myself alone for about 5 hours during the week, except for the person who worked at the front counter. The main and second floor kitchens were normal, nice, and well lit. The basement was purely storage, with a door at the stairs that was closed and locked at night. The basement had a walk-in freezer and fridge and was fairly large, with tons of containers, boxes, old equipment, and even holiday decorations. It was a classic unfinished basement, though. Super dark with a couple naked bulbs as the only light sources, lots of spiders no matter how much we cleaned, and a concrete floor. The basement was essentially dark, damp, and creepy. However, since we didn't have to spend much time down there, it didn't really matter. Now the front counter attendants were all in agreement: the place was haunted, and there was something especially creepy about the basement. I quickly was enlisted to do all the closing things in the basement, as at the time I had no fear of it. So I would go down there, turn off the lights, and close the door at the end of the night. For a while it was fine, just the occasional thing falling for no reason, maybe a creepy feeling here and there, but nothing that couldn't be explained away. But one night I went down, and as I turned off the light, the door to the basement slammed shut, leaving me in absolute darkness. I was terrified but rationalized. The door jamb must have fallen out. I nervously whispered to myself as I walked over to open it. The second I opened that door, I heard the sound of someone running up behind me. I didn't even look, just rushed through the door and slammed it behind me before rushing up the stairs to where the front counter girl was so I wouldn't be alone. I didn't want to feed into the general fear, so I kept this to myself for some time until another coworker said the exact same thing happened to them on one of my days off. I shared my experience, and from then on, when we worked together, we would close things up together. This unfortunately still left me on my own when she was away. On the weekends I also opened, which meant after having 2 days off, I would be alone in the bakery from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. Part of being the first one was putting on coffee, and I gladly did, needing the boost of energy to wake up. As I went to pour myself a cup one morning, I was startled to see a stack of cups fly over like someone smacked them. They went all over the floor, one even flying across the counter. I was so early into my shift I just tried to ignore it. I quickly cleaned up, made my coffee, and got to work, all the while refusing to listen to music as I normally did. I was glancing around, worried something else would happen, and didn't calm down until the next person came in at 7. My final experience occurred during my last week of working there. I was leaving for a job closer to home, and everything was going well. There was one day I went to put a tray of something in the freezer and get some containers. As I left the walk-in, I looked to the back of the basement and saw someone step behind a shelf. I knew it wasn't the girl working, as she was much shorter than whoever this was, so I called out another coworker's name. He often came in to set a couple of things up if he forgot to before his shift ended, and it wouldn't be the first time I'd been startled by him showing up. But it wasn't him. As I walked around the basement, it quickly became apparent it was empty, and I had just acknowledged whatever it was in the place. Something I learned much later could be very bad for me. Needless to say, I was very happy to leave and get away from all that. I've worked in quite a few places before and since, many of which people claim are haunted. But never have I worked somewhere where those claims were proven as thoroughly as that place. Ghost at work. I work at a gas station. And I am a spirit worker. I'm really into pagan worship, spirit work, tarot, etc., so I get a lot of spiritual attention. Want it or not. At work we have a spirit that loves to try to get our attention. However, I am usually too busy at work to determine if the spirit is harmless or not. If I had to guess, I would say mostly harmless, but I'm not sure yet. This spirit loves to get our attention by making us think a customer is in the building. We live in Boomerville, so business is pretty dead after 9 p.m. The spirit will make it sound like the front door opens, walk over to the cooler doors, slam the doors, and make it sound like something collapsed in the cooler, usually in that order. He seems to do this when a coworker is alone mostly and at night. However, he likes to mess with us in the day too when business is slow. One example is I physically felt someone walk behind me. I felt their breath and the feeling that if I backed up, I would run into them. I thought it was my coworker when I looked, and she wasn't there. I looked around, and she was on the other side of the building. I've heard the noises I talked about above hundreds of times, and my coworkers did too, and we talk about it sometimes, so I've waited until the ghost did something different to share it here. Today I was stocking the cooler at night when my manager ran in, looking freaked out. He asked if I thought the place was haunted, and I said yes. He told me just moments before he walked out of the office because he heard someone walk in. He scanned around for a customer and caught a man standing by the cooler door staring at him, who went away just as fast, and there were no customers. I think that was the only time this ghost scared me. Due to my spirit worker nature, I attract spirits and all sorts of energies. I know he targets the cooler often, but something was so unnerving to me about him standing by the door as I was working in there alone. I feel like he really wants me to talk to him, but I can't focus on spirit work at my job, and I'm skeptical about inviting him home. This isn't the first time a coworker saw him physically in or near the cooler. Another coworker told me he was working in the cooler with the door open when he saw someone walk out. He asked if we needed anything because he assumed it was us, but we told him we were behind the counter talking the whole time. On a funny note, my question is, why is he so obsessed with the cooler? Is he mad that Bang Energy is always out of stock because the vendor never comes, or what? I worked in a haunted library. So for a while I had a job cleaning an empty library outside of its opening hours. Nice and quiet job, I would get in early, get it done before staff or patrons came in, and still have the day ahead of me. Nice gig, honestly, I kind of wish I still did it. A few years prior to commencing my job, a tragic incident occurred in the building. I began the position without recalling that this was the building where the murder occurred, and I only remembered a few months later. The place always felt eerie, it's an empty, echoey library, and I showed up while it was still dark. There was no paranormal explanation needed for that. The first thing I noticed was the bathrooms. So the bathrooms had all the toilets/sinks on motion sensors. Every time I approached the front doors of the building, I could hear all or at least a number of them going off. I wrote it down to the sensors being faulty. It didn't occur to me until later that it always stopped a few minutes after I came in. My friend who worked there at a different time confirmed they don't do that during the day. Only when I came in the front door of the building. Having one go off occasionally was normal, a bunch at once was not, but I wasn't really thinking about that for a while. When it did occur to me after a while that it was kind of weird and didn't have a human explanation, hey, if the worst a ghost was going to do was get huffy and set off the sinks, I could deal with that. I wouldn't be thrilled either if I were dead and had someone disturb my peace at, like, 6 a.m. One morning, it was hours before anyone came in. During my time there, I never saw a single member of staff because they always came in hours after me. I was wringing out a cleaning cloth, looking down at it, and standing where I would have a clear line of sight to the door. The door rattled, like someone was pulling on it trying to get in. I didn't look up right away. That happens sometimes. People needed help with the outdoor return slot getting jammed or thought they could go in since the lights were on. The rattling continued for a second, then I heard distinct, audible footsteps on the entryway carpet, coming towards me, then silence. I knew in my gut that no one would be there when I looked up. I only heard those once, and honestly it probably should have scared me more than it did, but I kind of already figured the place was haunted, and the presumed ghost hadn't ever messed with me apart from setting stuff off. Not a big deal. However, it still surprised me. Just to be clear, there's absolutely no way it was a person. I never heard the door actually open, and even if a staff member had entered without acknowledging or noticing me, which would have been very strange, I would have encountered them at some point since it wasn't a very big library. I was chatting with a friend the other day about it, and she told me that she'd once heard someone come into the bathroom, only to leave and find the place was empty. So anyways, I worked in a haunted library, and that was that. An experience. My prison ghost stories. So, I have had several supernatural experiences and figured I would share some that have stood out. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I have moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I have learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events I witness. This makes report writing much easier and is helping me recount these events here. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state and was built in the 1870s, in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas that still operated have had little done to them since it was built. When I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places more than others, like the old unit that was a segregation, or what some people might know as the hole, with all the prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought because if I do not experience it, then it is just a cool story but not confirmed. First experience. I worked there for 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal and make sure he doesn't end himself. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes so I knew I was awake. I shone my flashlight on the prisoner I was watching and confirmed he was breathing at about 2 a.m. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and see someone patrolling the housing unit, but he does not appear to be legitimate. This guy is wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap and shiny black leather belt and has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue, they are gray and modern, whereas this one was old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, and then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure I was awake. When I looked back, there was not anyone there. Second experience. This one happened roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. The central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors but is open, so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who is leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off of the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows also. It was maybe 2100, and I was going to the rotunda to complete some paperwork with a coworker for my sergeant, which is common. As we were opening the open barred gate to go into the rotunda, I looked up and noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dim through the window in the door. I commented to my coworker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. As we both looked at the window, we observed something moving inside. We then realized that this was not a light malfunction but rather a shadow person standing in front of the window. We saw the shadow silhouette through the window as it moved left and through a wall into another room. We just looked at each other and kept going. Third experience. By the time this incident occurred, I had been an officer for about 3 years. I was working the third shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures. Also, there are several rifle posts around the prison's perimeter that are used to ensure its security, but we only ever use 3 of them during operational hours. In this case, it's important you know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so that we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we are dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation. So, I am working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility along with the perimeter security. As I am working, the phone rings, and the institutional caller ID says 1 post, which is odd because that post is not used because it is too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside it. At that time, no one should have been near the post, and if someone had reached it, at least 2 security alarms would have been triggered, which I was responsible for monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I figured it was just him playing a prank and that he knew a way around the sensors. So, I answered the phone, and all I heard was static that continuously increased and decreased in volume, as if someone were adjusting the volume on an old television set tuned to a static-filled channel. I hang up the phone and move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside, there is not anyone there. As I am looking at it, the phone rings again as an off the hook at 1 post. This time, my lieutenant picks up the phone, and after a minute, he walks back to me and asks if the perimeter officer is playing games, as he can hear mumbling that is blurred by static from the 1 post phone. He sees that I have the camera pointed right at it and that there is no one there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook. The officer took a while to get there, as he had been on the other side of the perimeter, and he had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time the phone has continued to ring from 1 post until I can see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there is not a phone in the post. My lieutenant responds that there must be one because the calls keep coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it and says that that is the only thing in the post. This post has not been used since the early 80s. Like I said, it was too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on the third shift until we updated our phone system to an internet-based system. Fourth experience. I had been an officer for about 4 years at this point. I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I am in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to this restroom, among other rooms in that wing. As the sound gets closer to the restroom, I can hear the large Folger keys that are clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out, saying, "I will be out in a minute." After I said that, the sound stopped. Thinking someone was waiting outside, I hurried and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door, and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors that I would have heard open and close, as well as any other door in the hallway, so they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly in the time between me calling to them and leaving the restroom. I returned to my post and asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts, given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations, I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above that one, and the areas outside the wing. No one was in that area during that time except for me, and there were no signs of distortions. Fifth experience. I had been an officer for about 6 years and was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the dinner lines were done, and my sergeant was talking with me, not like a management thing. We were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring that prisoners weren't passing meds, fighting, or worse. The medical hallway I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks. Specifically, right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that it was not us. We began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound. The sergeant points at it and says, "It must be broken, the switch is in the off position and the activation light is off." I looked closely and got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery, saying, "Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went white, and he walked off shaking his head, saying, "Nope, nope, nope. These intercoms don't have backup batteries, and there are no direct power hookups, just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected." The sounds continued for the duration of the medication lines. After that, I left the area and never heard the intercom make those sounds again. Paranormal sightings from my work's back warehouse, human-sounding noises, knocks, footfalls. So, I talked about something similar to this a while back here, and it got some attention, so I figured I would talk about another paranormal experience. For context, I work at Alco Clothing Outlet. I feel comfortable dropping the company name now, on account of the location I work at filing for bankruptcy, and the vast majority of the location is hosted by an extensive back warehouse taking up about 70% of the entire building. I work as a cleaner part-time, so it's rare I have to go back there for very long, but the majority of the stories I have stem from said back warehouse. Most importantly, this story is not mine. One of the store's cashiers, an older woman, told it to my manager, who told it to me the same day she heard about it, but several of my coworkers claim to have witnessed this same thing. Anyway, let's move on to the story and the reason I'm bringing it up. While she was on the main floor, my coworker, the cashier, claimed she heard sporadic and heavy footsteps on the roof of the building, easily some dozen feet above us and made of metal and concrete. As far as I'm aware, this is unprecedented, especially since no maintenance was scheduled that day, and even if it was, it wouldn't have involved the roof, let alone the section over the main floor. The main reason I'm inclined to even bring this up or believe it is because of another one of my personal experiences. My shift was cut an hour short one day because the manager on duty needed someone to be cut from the schedule due to it being so slow that particular day, but in order to stave off boredom since I do not know how to drive and my ride wouldn't be able to get me for another hour or so, I decided to wander into the back warehouse to call one of my buddies on the phone, since the lights were off and I was certain the last of the main back warehouse workers had gone home for the day as well, because who the hell works in the dark? As I got nearer the janitor's closet to put the last of my supplies away for the day, I heard what undeniably, to me, at least, sounded like the scuff of a sneaker on a tile floor hardly 3 feet beside me. It gave me enough pause to swivel my head around and skedaddle back to the safety of the main floor's break room. Mind you, this scuff was maybe 15 to 20 feet away from the spot where I saw a shadow figure weeks prior. Finally, since I feel it's partially relevant here and probably doesn't warrant its own conversation, many of my coworkers once again claim to regularly hear knocking from the main wall separating the lit floor and the dark warehouse, the only wall without any kind of window, gate, or door. Though that one could easily be explained away in my mind. Does anyone think this could at all be related to the tall figure that ducked out of view that I'd mentioned in a prior confession, or if it's even paranormal at all? Haunted workplace. My workplace is haunted. I just want to share a few stories that my colleagues and I have experienced. My colleague told me when they were on closing shift, the TV remote flew off the counter and into the center of the room. This has happened on several occasions, with different people telling me. We have overnight work hours every couple of months to get paperwork done. Every time we have one, I see someone. I've seen a man and a woman on separate occasions as well as one of my colleagues. I saw a man walk into a room. I went to go ask him a question. I walked in there, and there was no one there. Another time I saw a woman standing in a corner looking down. Made my heart drop. My colleague said she saw a man walk in front of a window. We are on the second floor. We hear voices every time we leave the main work area. You can never make out what they are saying, but it's a man and a woman talking. I've heard my colleague's voice out in the hallway, and they are not at work that day. My colleagues tell me they hear my voice when I am not around either. When you go into the break room alone, it feels like someone is staring you down the whole time. And you hear the chairs creak. On occasion when we come into work, our CCTV will be on. And whoever closes the night before knows they turned it off. One particular thing did happen to me. I was looking for our stereo remote so we can play music. I couldn't find it for weeks. My colleagues and I leave the main work area, and we come back to the stereo remote on the middle of the table, where it was just cleaned prior to leaving the main work area. I told my colleagues, "Hey, I've been looking for this." They all look at each other and me, saying they never found it or touched it. A lot of noises and mumbles happen. More often than not, to be honest. There's an old World War II building in downtown Toronto's Liberty District. I used to work there when I was security. It's currently a condo showroom with a warehouse, but overnight it's just duct. You would walk in and have to check the entire area on the main floor, which is usually not really an issue, but there are big glass doors that separate the showroom from the warehouse. You would always get a sense of being watched, at least for me, because apparently for me, it's very easy for me to be correct on that feeling. Either way, you would almost always feel eyes on you while you're inside, nothing sinister, but eyes nonetheless. There's also a one-floor elevator that lets you go from the main to the second floor. Once you head upstairs, though, it gets weird. The upstairs has a wooden staircase that leads up as well, with light switches right at the top. The second floor never has the main lights on after hours but rather a random switch up between a set pattern of lights like orange, purple, and red. You can either turn those off and the main lights on or keep the colors on and walk through, but nah, duck that. While up there, you would feel even more eyes but be worse off. Because of the sound of high heels walking on wood flooring. Usually either walking away or toward you. There are 2 alleyways of cubicles that all lead toward 2 big floor-to-ceiling windows that are right above the glass doors to the warehouse, which look down into said warehouse. Apparently my manager at the time laughed at me when I said what I heard and said she's also heard those steps when she did those patrols but also saw something worse, where if you stood in the hallway facing the glass window, you could see someone walking around behind you in the reflection. Thankfully, I never saw that. When you come up those stairs, there is a small room right behind the reception desk that is open from both sides, where they keep their printers and supplies. For the months that I did that patrol, that room never had its lights on, but this one day as I came up those stairs, that light was on. I knew this was the one day I needed to grab my phone and start recording my patrol. I did the patrol on video, but nothing happened, so I left that alone and stopped, but just as I was about to end the patrol for the night, I decided to record again just in case, and oh boy. First, as the camera panned to the side, you suddenly saw an orb fly toward the camera, and then as I made my way down the stairs, you suddenly heard shuffling from the cubicle on my left. I turned the camera back to look at it, and that's when the heels on wood started to sound. After they stopped, A few seconds later, suddenly someone or something on my floor pressed the elevator button. That's when I got the duck out. All of that is on video, and I made sure to save it to this day. There have been multiple other units that also experienced the footsteps. Another time I had to use the washroom downstairs, and while in there, almost dead quiet, BTW, I could hear movement around above me. We only go in one at a time, never in groups unless you ask for backup, because Alta units knew about this ducked place, and I was alone at the time. Soon after, I suddenly heard a scream up above. I got out of the washroom, immediately left the building, and called for backup, and they called for a police escort as well. We all walked back in with the cops, went upstairs, and they checked all cubicles, fire exits, and all. We found nothing at all and left. Apparently the police knew of this place as well. So glad I am out of that. It's been here for decades, and I can only imagine how much has been seen and done there. I saw something at work once, and I'm convinced it's evil. I saw something at my old job once, and I'm convinced it was evil. I'll never forget it, and I want to see if someone can offer me insight as to what I saw. I'm sharing this to as many places as I can as long as I have the nerve. I find it to be very embarrassing and unsettling to remember overall. I'm not a big believer in ghosts because I feel that, if they existed, someone could measure them after all these years of exploration and be able to readily repeat trials as any valid science. The lack of hard evidence makes me skeptical at best, and I dismiss most claims or experiences as illusions of the mind. This particular experience, along with a few others that have been shared with me or that I have personally encountered, is one that I am certain cannot be attributed to a trick of the mind. Just to give some context and layout, I worked at a group home for adults with disabilities for several years in college. It was a typical house in a normal New Jersey neighborhood, likely under 60 years old, on a corner lot. It was a split level with 5 levels, a basement, lower level, main level, upper level, and a walk-up attic. If you walked in from the front door, you'd come into a hall that had the kitchen straight ahead through a single archway. Directly to your right in the hall, there was an insert for a small console table before 2 closet doors, followed by steps to the upper level. A few feet into the left is a double, square archway into the living room directly across from the closets. The living room was rectangular and pretty large, with the television centered on the far wall over the fireplace and built-in, half-wall height bookshelves. After the sofa, against the right wall, was another double arch between it and the TV and built-ins that led into the dining room. This night, the day after Halloween, of course, I was already dressed for a party I was leaving for after work. My clients got a lot of joy out of costumes and having input, so I always went out of my way to include them as best I could, and I thought they'd like to see my poor girl's version of Papa Legba. It was a hit. I had blacked out my eyes and drawn teeth over my lips in eyeliner to resemble a skull to really sell it. I even had the opportunity to share some stories about Papa Legba, which served as an enjoyable snack time or bedtime tale for them. After all this, they were all still convinced I was a cat or a witch, because I'm honestly a bad artist but a good one. Around 10 p.m., I was in the living room, alone, after my coworker left and my clients had gone to bed. This was a common occurrence, and nothing particularly unusual had occurred until this night. So, while finishing my paper documentation, I would play random things on Netflix on the Wii, and sometimes, this jarring thing would happen. It would freeze on the frame of whatever I was watching, and this blaring noise, kind of like an over-revving engine mixed, would blast from the speakers of the TV no matter if the volume was down to a low murmur when running properly. I used to attribute the issue to the fact that it was an old Wii, but I noticed it only occurred when I was alone. I was pretty much the only one to use these things since it was my personal stuff that I brought there for them to have, and my colleagues had a rough time getting how to work the Wii. So, even when my clients were around, I would exclusively be the one to put on movies for them, which made me never question why the freezing was singular to me. However, now that I'm writing this, I realize it was strange that the freezing never occurred when my colleagues were present, even though it happened to me almost every night during my last hour of work. Anyway, when it would lock up like this, I'd have to do this dry restart of unplugging/plugging the Wii back in, which required me to go up to where the TV is. The TV was a wall-mounted, matte LCD screen with a reflective black border around it, and the Wii was slightly off-centered to the right beneath it, sitting on top of the built-in. I did my dry restart. I had a single lamp on by the dining room arch, but no lights on in the entry hallway or dining room since everyone was asleep, which made the hall beyond the arch appear black. During this process and the TV going dark from me disconnecting the Wii, a short figure caught my eye in the reflection of the TV screen's frame from the archway. She was a child, about 7 to 10, averagely thin and long-limbed, with dark, thick, long hair and bangs. It looked only slightly disheveled, like she had been sleeping. She was wearing a white, sleeveless nightdress that came down to just above her knees. The child was just standing there with her legs about a foot apart, her bare feet pointed forward. Her arms were at her sides and curled outward at the elbow with extended, parted fingers pointing towards her thighs, with sharply angled hands and wrists. Her head was slightly tilted downward and to the side. Looking towards me, at me. I could feel it like an unwelcome leer from a person who's looking at you with a sour thought. I froze, a horrible reaction and a pretty unusual one for me, which I regret more and more when I tell this story. My brain was reeling with thoughts. Why is there a kid in here? What do I do? Does she need help? There was an instant feeling of pure fear and revulsion that confused me. It was almost a visceral and primal response to danger, a threat that my body reacted to while my brain was still trying to understand the thoughts of a lost child. My mind had already created a narrative that she was dared by a sibling to enter the group home on All Saints' Day, which was a Friday this year, to catch a glimpse of my clients and confirm whatever stories children shared with one another on fall nights, and seeing me caused her to freeze just like me. I just kept staring back at her through the reflection for what felt like minutes, both of us unmoving and unbending, but it was likely only a few seconds. I sucked air in, and I realized I had held my breath for that momentary eternity, quickly spinning on my heel and snapping my head to where she should have been, but there was no one there. No noise of a creaky, opening front door, no fleeing tiny footsteps on hardwood, nothing. She was just gone. I looked back at the TV, hoping to see even a glare from the lamp to explain what I had seen, despite her being as clear as my reflection, but there was nothing where she had been. Just the black archway. I was terrified. So terrified, I did the most unprofessional thing of my career to date and woke one of my clients up to stay with me for as long as she could keep her eyes open. I didn't tell her what had happened, but I know she could tell I was frightened because I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. My lovely client, my sweet angel, held out with me with sleepy eyes, and I only had to spend about 5 minutes by myself before the relief staff came in around 11 p.m. I told her what had happened, and she told me she hadn't ever seen a thing and that my own reflection, with my Halloween makeup of blacked out eyes, likely scared me, but I was inches from the screen. This was a full figure, and my face was as visible as hers. I left in such a hurry. I shared the story with my friends at the party, who dismissed it with shock and laughter as a good ghost tale. I didn't have the energy to insist with them that it had happened, and I wasn't just telling stories to frighten them. The following morning I was into work at 7 a.m., and I'm not sure if I slept at all that night. I told my other colleagues, including both the overnight relief worker and the other morning person, that a former overnight worker, whom I had never met because she retired nearly a year before I arrived, had seen the same thing I described and also believed it was evil. My coworker shared that she saw it almost every night, but they had all dismissed her as a superstitious old woman. I'll never forget it, and it makes me sick to think about it. I never saw her again, but I can still feel the tightness in my chest every time I recall it. I never watched Netflix at work again and often sat in the office for my last hour, which was a remodeled sunroom with all the lights on. What do you guys think I saw?